Number 5. Hypnotic Regression. Many people who claim to have been abducted by aliens are unable to remember a lot of the specific details of their abductions. Because of this and the public stigma against people with alien experiences, many people choose to never come forward, or their stories are written off as delusion. But in the spirit of giving people the benefit of the doubt, let's talk about a certain woman's experience with hypnotic regression. A woman who claims she was abducted by aliens was put under hypnosis in order to give a documentary crew information about the visitors from other worlds. When asked how aliens are able to travel at such incredible speeds, she responded with the following: "I can't explain it, but it's like if they want to get from one point to another point, they remove what's in between, so they don't have to travel that distance. They are instantly from there to there." When asked why aliens are studying humans, the response was, "They are very wary of humankind. Mankind is progressing technology-wise, and soon he's going to come across technology that will allow him to peel back the layers of dimensions. And they want to know all about man for their own benefit. Man's warlike, aggressive, an animal. He's in possession of technology that is more than he is. There's no balance. And they're very wary that he's now on the threshold of many breakthroughs, one of which is peeling back dimensions. It's like an onion skin. You peel back one layer, and there's another one underneath, and another one underneath, and another one underneath. The same with dimensions. They're scared. Do aliens really study humanity out of a fear of what we will do once we discover interdimensional travel? And if so, how do they feel about all the UFOs we have apparently shot down? What do species historically do with groups that they are afraid of? What fate awaits the human race at the hands of these interplanetary visitors? Number 4. Sam the Sandown Clown. Our next story comes from the January-February edition of the British UFO Research Association Journal and concerns an anonymous man going by the alias of Mr. Y, who claims that one October night in the year 1970, he was driving to visit a friend when he saw something hovering over the swamp to his right. It was a huge UFO with several different multicolored orb-like lights brightly illuminating the craft. He got out of his vehicle to observe the craft for a moment and then continued on his way. He looked out his window and realized that the craft was now following him, its lights spinning. Mr. Y got to his friend's house, and the friend was amazed at the guests that had followed him there, before disappearing into a nearby tree line. For years, Mr. Y would see the red orbs following him from time to time, watching him and stalking him. Doubting that anyone would believe him, he kept these encounters to himself until 1973, when his 7-year-old daughter Faye and her friend were playing near Lake Common Road when they heard an eerie wailing sound. They followed the sound to a nearby meadow, and the wailing stopped. They walked over a small bridge when suddenly a blue-gloved hand with 3 fingers appeared from under the bridge. They looked in the small river and saw a strange figure standing in the middle holding a book. He was described as being 7 feet tall and without a neck. He was wearing an odd and tattered costume consisting of a green tunic with a red collar, white pants, and a pointed hat with a black ball on top and 2 antennae. He had a pale white face, lips that never moved, red hair, and triangle holes for eyes. The children watched in shock as the figure hobbled over to a strange metal hut. Not long after, they saw the figure again as he wailed, and then spoke into a microphone asking if they were still there. He then communicated by writing in his book, saying that his name was Sam. They asked if he was a man, and he said no. They asked if he was a ghost, and he said, "Well, not really, but in a way I am." He said that there were others like him and that he was afraid of being attacked by humans. He invited them into his metal hut, which was filled with wooden furniture and elaborate knobs. The children hung out with Sam for an hour before leaving, and a year later, she told her father about the encounter, telling him that there had been men nearby fixing a post who had acted as though they could not see the strange creature. He had trouble believing her, but he had had enough experiences with aliens of his own that he had to consider the possibility that it was real. Did Mr. Y's daughter really see a strange alien in the woods, or is this just the overactive imagination of a child? In an age where spacecraft are being seen all over the world at an alarming rate, we really can't rule anything anything out? And what of the UFO stalking Mr. Y? What were they hoping to see? And why was he selected to be the subject of their curiosity? This mystery will likely never be fully unraveled. Number 3. Aliens take a baby. Our next entry comes courtesy of phantomsandmonsters.com and describes a 14-year-old visiting the home of some seniors and seeing something more terrifying than they could possibly imagine. As they themselves told it, I witnessed an alien abduction back in 2002 when I was 14. A friend of mine wanted me to help her grandparents set up their computer. I said sure and rode my bicycle to their house. I got there and clouds appeared, so I decided to make this a pretty quick visit. I set up the computer and installed some software for them, showing them all how it works and such. They go back and sit on the couch while I get my backpack to get ready to leave, as their other granddaughter, who is about 6 years old, was sleeping in the other room. All of a sudden, a cold breeze went through the room. It was odd, as all the doors and windows were shut. The grandparents looked towards the kitchen, and what I saw made me freeze in place. There were 3 creatures standing in the kitchen. 2 of them were short, gray alien creatures, with thicker necks than usually described, with the eyes closer to the sides of their heads. They wore silver jumpsuits. In between them was a taller creature that looked like a humanoid mantis, wearing a black robe with a yellow stripe going down the middle. They walked to another room, and a minute later returned with the robed creature, carrying the granddaughter in its arms. It's looking at me, and I get the feeling it knows who I am. I don't know why I got the feeling, but I did. I was very scared. The grandparents were looking at them too, but not doing anything. I thought, screw this, and fought off all the fear I could and clumsily charged towards them. I didn't even make 3 steps before the grandfather stopped me and told me they will bring her back. The creatures didn't move and continued to look at me. I couldn't get any more words out of my throat because I didn't even know what to think at this point. All of a sudden, a light stretched around them and they vanished. An odd glow remained for a few seconds before fading. After a minute of awkward silence and the grandfather repeating, "She will be brought back," soon I decided to leave. I rode my bicycle home as fast as I could while looking back, hoping that nothing was following me. I didn't sleep that night after I got home. The next day, I told my friend what had happened, and she told me it has happened before. The grandparents and other family members have tried to stop it, but to no avail. They just accepted it with a look of defeat and moved on. The granddaughter was brought back after a few hours. Not long after I witnessed this incident, their whole family moved elsewhere. I've heard from other people who claimed to experience similar events, and I feel they are legit. Why are aliens taking babies away from their families? What are they hoping to learn? And is there some way to stop them? One can hope, but it seems unlikely. Number 2. Dream or abduction. This next story is from an anonymous Reddit user who claimed to be abducted and experimented on by aliens before waking up at home with injuries related to the experiment. As he told the story, in July of 2015, back when I was 19, I lived in a house in Southport, Sacramento with 3 other friends. I woke up one night to a light coming through the ceiling of my room, and it lifted me out of my bed. Next thing I know, I'm in some kind of chair and unable to control my body, like I was drugged with something. There were guys that were not human men, but gray people with large black almond-shaped eyes doing stuff with what seemed like medical instruments and machines. I was very terrified. I was unarmed, naked, unable to move. I was so scared. One of them was touching the machine that put the tube down my throat and into my stomach. His hand got close to my face because he had to adjust something holding my head in place. I remember getting a good look at his hand and eyes. They had long fingers with pads at the tips, sort of like salamanders, and they don't have fingernails. Their skin is gray, but kind of like a powdery translucent gray. They had large heads with small necks, so small and thin it didn't make sense. Their arms and fingers were long and skinny too. I was in the chair with my head and jaw held by something so I didn't see their feet. I'd say the tallest probably stood about the height of my lowest rib, and for reference, I'm 5'10". The tube machine sucked out the food I ate earlier that day, and then was pulled out of me. I don't remember how I got there, but then I remembered being in a cage made of some kind of metal that reminded me of aluminum. In a room with curved walls. In front of me was a man who looked a lot like a human, talking to a gray person on a window that lit up a screen like a hologram. The man was tall and looked like a human, except that his skin was very white and his hair was blonde and platinum. He spoke with a gray person on the holo screen in a language I didn't understand. He wore a blue flight uniform of some kind. This man was obviously military of some sort, judging by his uniform. The gray person spoke in a language that sounded like birds chirping. Once the call was over, the holo screen turned into a different display with symbols, and the man turned and walked to me. He crouched down and spoke to me in plain English and said to me, "Everything's gonna be fine. I'm going to get you out of here and take you home." I was so happy to hear that. He opened the cage, and next thing I know, I fell on top of my bed with my back hitting the mattress first. I immediately got out of bed bed right after I fell. Was this a real alien abduction or simply a horrible nightmare? Typically, I would think it was merely a bad dream, but the user describes extreme pain in his throat for days afterwards from the tube being forced into him. What was the source of this pain if it was simply a dream? Truly a strange encounter to contemplate. Number 1. The Alien and the Bassinet. Our final story is another from phantomsandmonsters.com about a woman who was asleep in bed next to her baby's bassinet before waking up and seeing something that would make any mother panic. The following is an excerpt from her account. I turned over on my side, facing the bassinet, and noticed a bright light coming in between the window blinds. I thought out loud, is it morning already? The light was coming in between the blinds and it was so bright, but the rest of the room was dark. There was also a bright light on the wall next to the window, and I looked up to see where the light was coming from. To my horror, just above the bassinet was an alien's gray face. It was just the head, no upper body, legs, or arms. The head was dark in color, very round, ending in a pointed chin, and there was a small slit for a mouth. The nostrils were small, but the eyes were large and almond-shaped and very shiny black. It had some sort of glass lamp on the top of its head. The light on the wall was projected from the lamp. Then I noticed that the being was looking down at my baby daughter. Oh my god, I couldn't speak. My heart started pounding so hard that I started trembling uncontrollably. It saw me and realized I was looking at it. The being moved towards me and I started screaming and swinging my arms. I remember that I screamed out loud for it to leave. It floated from its original position above the bassinet to just above my face. I remember seeing this light blue fog build up in front of my face, and then in a dreamlike manner, I heard a cooing sound similar to mourning doves. I had the feeling that whoever was talking to me was stern and was telling me that it was for our own good. The woman then describes waking up with a sore spot on her head and the alien being gone without a trace. She insists it was not a dream and that she really saw an alien creature that she believes will one day return. For her sake, let us hope it was simply a dream.
Number 5. Strange things in the skies. Now, I know I talked about this in a previous video, and if you're a really good Top 5 Scary fan, maybe you'll recognize some of these. But since I aired that last video, way more weird stuff has happened, so it only seems fitting that we'd run through it once again. Starting on February 10th, yours truly's birthday by the way, there was a pattern of incredibly bizarre happenings in the skies, and some very, very dodgy answers from government officials who refused to confirm or deny anything, which always seems more suspicious than less. So here's a quick Cole's Notes play-by-play of the last few weeks. On February 10th, US fighter jets brought down a still unidentified object over the coast of Alaska. This object has not been confirmed what it is at all or identified, but it's been confirmed as not being a balloon. Okay, that's one thing, only a million left to go. One official referred to it as being the size of a small car, which is definitely beyond strange. You think you would see that flying around? This single event would probably be enough to set tinfoil hats on fire and keep me in business for the next few years making videos about conspiracies, but the literal next day on February 11th, a UFO was shot down over Canada, around the Yukon. That's the big territory up on the left, right by Alaska. A US fighter jet downed this one, and it was described as being smaller than the first and cylindrical in nature, which is gonna come up a few times before this video is done, so hold on to that thought, there's still more. February 12th, we had something bizarre shot down over Lake Huron. An object that first appeared over Montana reappeared on Sunday before being shot down with an octagonal structure and strings hanging off of it, but it wasn't carrying anything, which is bizarre. And then over Billings, Montana, there was something very bizarre that was seen falling from the sky, leaving a thick orange chemtrail, and residents were left in the dark about it. Local residents wondered just what it was, and some Redditors in a group noticed around the area that there had been an increased military presence since the sighting. So just what is going on around here, there, and just about everywhere? But if you can't wait at all, and you just want to watch alien videos all day, I agree with you. That's what I do every single day, and it's a great way to live. We've got loads of alien and UFO vids, NASA conspiracies, all the things they don't want you to know. And if that ain't your jam, we got scary stories, horror movies, monsters, cryptids, true crime, just about everything spooky under the sun and above it. So stay subscribed to Top 5 Scary, but most importantly, stay scared. And keep watching this video, because I got way more weird stuff coming up for you. Number 4, the Tom DeLonge sighting. If you're a UFO enthusiast, then you know that one of the leading names in UFO research and discovery right now is Tom DeLonge, the nasally voiced frontman for pop punk project Blink-182. And if you didn't know that, now you do. Although I suspect most of the people who watch our videos don't know that band. Anyway, little trivia for you. That's what he does when he's not selling out $300 concerts. He hunts aliens, and he's pretty good at it. If some of the footage he gathers is anything to go by, why don't you take a look at this weird footage he shared on his Instagram a couple days ago. It's gonna go right there. Pretty darn weird, huh? If that isn't one of the most clear, close encounters I've ever seen, I'm not sure what is. You can practically like trace the outline of the flying saucer. It looks like the platonic flying saucer, like the one we all imagine when we close our eyes. I can almost see the little green man inside. On his Instagram, DeLong wrote this caption: "Enjoy. They are real." To the Stars Media will be turning real events like these into major feature films and television series to bring the facts to the world. Note the whirling sound from the propulsion. Now, To the Stars is the fringe research company owned by Tom DeLong, hoping to spread information and explore the possibility of UFOs and UAPs, and it does also sound like it's a plan to get Tom DeLong some more money by making a cinematic alien universe. Whatever his endgame is though, can't deny the footage posted here is eerily compelling. Number 3, Gary McKinnon. Now, I've talked a bit about Gary McKinnon before on this channel because I am obsessed with this story. He's a notorious hacker who broke into NASA's security. His story is a cool one. I love anytime you hear someone pulling a fast one over a government agency like this, so it bears repeating. He's a genius computer hacker with a lot of spare time and wanted to know just what the Yanks were hiding from his home in Scotland. He wanted to go after NASA's data server to see if they had anything hidden they'd never told anybody about. Been called the biggest military hack of all time, so I'd wager maybe he found something. Why risk your life, career, freedom on this exactly? McKinnon claims he had received an insider tip that the US had reverse engineered technology from UFOs, free energy. In his own words, he said, "This should not be kept hidden from the public when pensioners can't even pay their fuel bills. And it's just like a bonus if you get some alien stuff on the side." So what did he find? McKinnon claims in his searching he saw images of aircraft that did not resemble any he had ever seen in his life. One in particular he describes as looking like a massive cigar-shaped craft floating over the northern hemisphere that did not look man-made. He said he was in shock looking at the image and didn't think to take a photo. Well, there's those cylindrical shaped crafts again. I told you to keep thinking about them, and keep thinking about them again because they're going to show up one more time before this video is done. Well, that wasn't the only exciting thing he found. He also found something called the Disclosure Project, a 400-page document outlining testimonials from government agents across multiple branches of service recording sightings of unidentified objects, but that wasn't even the meal ticket. The real jewel was a document of a non-terrestrial officer's sheet. A spreadsheet listing the name of NASA agents to be transferred to new ships or serve on board space stations, but McKinnon noted that none of the names of the vessels existed in any database. Now, I don't know how much you know about the US government, but they absolutely love it when you poke holes in their important security, triply so if you do it from the comfort of your bedroom in a country away. The US tried their level best to extradite McKinnon, but were prevented by the Crown from serving out a 70-year sentence. McKinnon's doing well. He recently took to the UFO subreddit to answer questions from fans and true believers. There wasn't a whole lot of new information, but it's just nice to know he hasn't been shoved into a black van somewhere. Number 2, the Navy and their pilots, Navy pilots. In September 2019, Navy spokesperson Joe Gradisher spoke out on 3 recently released videos by the Army that contained evidence of unexplained aerial phenomena. The Navy agreed that just this once, they would be willing to talk about something weird they'd seen and recorded because pilots are reportedly encountering bizarre things every day and feel just too uncomfortable to report it. One pilot in particular, Ryan Graves, who's a 10-year vet, has said he believes he's seen thousands of unexplained phenomena in the air in his career. But these go unreported because of the stigma attached to the previous theories about what may or may not be in the videos, in his words. To translate that a bit in layman's terms, the Navy feels that they have to comment so that pilots are willing to talk about that, hey, maybe we're seeing UFOs without feeling too crazy. These videos in question were released from 2017 to 2018, and they feature long, oblong-shaped objects captured with infrared that disappear in the Earth's atmosphere. Hey, there it is again, more cylindrical-shaped UFOs. Now, I'll be clear, I don't really have much of a connection or through line here, but I do think it's very fascinating how many of these stories do mention these cylindrical-shaped objects. Far from the earliest or last, in 2004 and in 2015, 2 similar sightings were reported featuring similar vehicles. Now, the purpose of investigating most of these reports is more focused on safety hazards and threats of national security. And at the same time, maybe they're not openly admitting they've got UFOs flying around, but they're getting pretty darn close. The 2004 sighting, I think, is a particularly fascinating one. Two pilots, one Commander Fravor and one Lieutenant Commander Slate, called it in, reporting that they saw objects out of nowhere at some 80,000 feet in the air, and then descending rapidly towards the Pacific Ocean, stopping at around 20,000 feet and hovering in place. They would drop out of radar range or shoot directly up in the sky on a 90-degree angle. You know, normal things aircrafts love to do. They weren't American crafts, and they weren't recognized by any organizations they'd ever seen. Maybe it's tech not of this world. Number 1, government councils. You know, the era we're in right now is probably one of the most fascinating times to be invested in UFOs and unexplained alien sightings, so consider yourself lucky. Because it seems like we are getting dangerously close to a government finally confessing it. It feels like we're weeks away some days, you know? The UAP report was a seminal turning point when the Pentagon outright admitted they had thousands of documents and reports and investigations into the possibility of life somewhere out there in the Milky Way. Over the years, there have been a few investigations into unexplained aerial phenomena, but they're usually pretty hush-hush clandestine. Project Blue Book is probably the most famous secret project among them, but that was, a secret. Well, in the interest of transparency, as of October 2022, NASA is coming clean, washing their hands, and opening a new study into the research of extraterrestrial life. 16 hand-picked scientists and specialists have been selected to analyze data and determine how best to go forward when observing events. And they're not really looking at past cases, they're more looking towards future things. And this project will include researchers, personnel from all divisions, including former astronaut Scott Kelly, who served as the pilot for the Discovery shuttle and also held the world record for most days in space. So I guess he probably knows one or two things about space, maybe, and I'm sure he's seen something weird. Kelly himself doesn't personally believe in aliens, saying, "I think there's probably intelligent life in the universe, but I don't think they visit planet Earth." Why not? We got lots of great stuff out here. We got water slides, we got Vin Diesel. No other planet has those two things, and I'm sure we got a couple other great things from the human experience, so aliens, come on down when you're ready. We'll welcome you with open arms, and if those were UFOs you sent, we're really sorry that we shot those down. I didn't have anything to do with that. Number 5, Hopkinsville. In 1955, two families in Hopkinsville told a story that would go down in infamy to UFO enthusiasts. They claimed that not only did they see a flying saucer soar right above their property, but that they engaged in a firefight against extraterrestrial invaders. Master Chief would be so proud. Let's take a listen to this wild story. So night was falling over Kelly, a rural area outside of Hopkinsville, Kentucky, in the summer of '55. Billy Ray Taylor, and that's the most country name I've ever heard in my life, was taking a trip to the family well, and at the time he was staying with Glennie Lankford at their farmhouse alongside the Sutton family, who had all left the carnival life. And a quick aside before I get too distracted here, a bunch of carnival workers fighting aliens is absolutely the plot to a great direct-to-VHS 80s movie, I'm sure. Anyway, Billy Ray was outside gathering water when he saw a bright light shoot across the sky. Now, Billy Ray swore he saw a saucer above zipping through the clouds and landing behind a patch of trees. He told everybody back at the farm about a round metallic object with rainbow-colored streaks trailing behind it. Sounds a lot like my gamer desk. Now, Billy Ray was known to exaggerate, so at first no one really believed him, which I kinda get. I wouldn't really believe someone named Billy Ray either, lest he was talking about his heart. He convinced somebody else to go outside with him just to get some eyes on it, and they saw a glowing figure emerging from the woods. The pair then ran back to the house to arm themselves. They grabbed 22 LR rifles and claimed they saw something with an inhuman face pressing its nose against the window. They opened fire and claimed that the sounds of their bullets sounded like they were connecting with metal. Police investigated the next day and found no traces of any aliens, just discarded shells and casings. Now, since then, Hopkinsville has embraced this bit of folklore and now holds a festival dedicated to celebrating their alien visitors. Did they ever truly visit? I gotta say though, they're probably not gonna come back anytime soon if that's how we greet them. They were just trying to be friendly walking out in the woods and we shot at them. Ain't that human? And if you're looking for more terrifying tales of extraterrestrial horror, cryptids, ghouls, ghosts, and goblins, well, Top 5 Scary is the place for all of that and then some. So stay subscribed, and more importantly, stay scared. But also stay listening, because we got a lot more video to go. Number 4, the Men in Black. Our next encounter comes from a Redditor posting his story. His name is user UberoBob, and he details a bizarre encounter with the fabled Men in Black. No, not like the movies, but this is stranger than fiction. The Redditor describes being 26 years old in the summer of 2007. He was living at his parents' house at the time, and it was a stormy night, and he was staying in playing World of Warcraft. Awesome way to start a horror story. Makes me, well, a lot more believable for me. He was finishing up one of the longest chain quests in the game, the opening of Anchorage, if there's any Azeroth heads out there, and the internet went out. And if you know anything about that quest line, you know how much that would devastate you. The Redditor was frustrated and beaten down, and he tried to investigate the internet to see if there was anything he could do to fix it, figuring it was knocked out by the storm. He then heard a smashing knock at his door. When he went to see who it was, he saw 3 incredibly tall, pale men dressed in all black suits, one of them holding a folder and another holding a device that looked like a Geiger counter. He opened the door and the man in front greets in a low, monotone voice. He asks the men in black what's going on, and they tell him that they need to check the water from the house's faucet. He's kind of confused, but he says sure, and from here all the lights in his house shut out, like pitch black, he says. The men in black tell him to stay calm. They turn on flashlights in their breast pockets, and as the light shines over the tallest one, the Redditor swears that he saw through the man's face, and saw a metal face underneath it. A moment later, the tallest says, "It's begun," and the Geiger counter begins going haywire. The Redditor says he felt excruciating pain all over his body and his vision beginning to blur, as he only sees white coming over him. He describes seeing his memories flash through him quickly, seeing the earth above the sky, and then feeling like he's falling, and then waking up in his bed drenched in sweat, thinking it was all just a terrible dream. Except when he checks the date on his computer, it's been a week since he was last awake. And when he checks inside his closet, the Geiger counter from before is there. So whatever happened, happened. But what happened? And who were they? Alien visitors? Government agents of the highest order? And did he ever end up finishing the opening of Anchorage? We may never know. Number 3, the Sandown Clown. Oh, that's fun to say. Give that a try at home. Sandown Clown. Oh, let me talk about a Sandown Clown. Okay, I'll do it serious. Our next entry is an obscure being whose mystery has taunted investigators for decades. The Sandown Clown. Sandown is a seaside resort near the Isle of Wight in the United Kingdom. Of course the United Kingdom has an Isle of Wight. It's a popular tourist spot where tourists pass through every year through its shops, restaurants, and natural beauty. And while it's got a rich culture and history of its own, it's this one event in May 1973 that stood out and what we're talking about today. Like most good cryptid stories, the person who found the creature was a young girl and her playmate. The girl was named Faye, and the boy's name has remained anonymous over the years. The two of them were playing games near the lake in the daytime when they both heard a bizarre siren-like screech. The two of them went off to investigate because, you know, they're kids. I would just ignore a siren screech personally. And they reached a small marsh between the golf course and the airport. Under a small footbridge, they saw a mysterious hand appear. Now, according to the children, a hand wearing a blue glove appeared from under the bridge, followed by a book of some kind being dropped in the water. A figure appeared out of the water and scurried into a nearby hut. The children described this creature as walking with a strange hopping motion. They say that it screeched at them and it sounded like microphone feedback. They described the creature as being 7 feet tall with no neck. It wore a yellow hat with a round black knob on its top and strange antennae on the sides. The creature had triangular eyes, a square nose, and extremely white skin and red fringed hair. Clown found under a bridge? Near sewers? I don't really know how I feel about that. I feel like I've seen a clown under a bridge before, and it really didn't end well for that little boy. Upon being asked, it told the little girl that its name was Sam, and that it was all colors, whatever that means. When asked if it were a human, it said it wasn't, and when asked if it was a ghost, it is reported to have answered, well, not really, but I am in an odd sort of way. All other questions about what it might have been, it only answered with, you know, classic. And since then, the mystery has never been solved. So what do you think it could have been? Alien visitor from another world? Strange cryptid? Very complicated prank? We may never know. Number 2, Valiant Thor. Now our next alien is a truly strange one. It starts as a UFO sighting and gets a lot weirder. According to the account in a 2001 book, Stranger at the Pentagon, on March 16th, 1957, someone identifying themselves as Valiant Thor came forward to the White House and introduced themselves as an envoy from the planet Venus. Now, normally you would not expect someone like that to get very far at all, in fact, not even get past the gate. But in Mr. Valiant Thor's case, allegedly this was enough to get him meetings with several high-profile members members of the US government, going all the way up to President Eisenhower and Vice President Nixon. The author Frank Stranges shares a report from Harley Andrew Bird, a man who worked a high clearance position at the Pentagon that was involved with Project Blue Book, the Air Force program dedicated to UFO research. Well, Bird's department received a police report about somebody who'd been arrested in Virginia, who had proclaimed himself a space emissary, and instead of tossing him in an asylum, he was taken to the Pentagon immediately. Bird's account says that Thor landed in 1957 and spent a few years meeting various high-level officials all around the country. Presidents, world leaders, Elvis Presley, so on. The author Frank Stranges claims that he met Thor in 1959 at the Pentagon in the winter, beginning with Thor showing the men a shimmering garment that looked like sunshine made from alien materials. Oh, that just sounds delightful. He told them he was sent to Earth to protect humanity from annihilating themselves. And if you're watching this video, we haven't currently annihilated ourselves just yet from nuclear proliferation, so maybe Valiant Thor helped us out more than we realize. I know it's pretty fantastical, it's an out-of-this-world story, so let me know what you think. Fact or just total fiction? And finally, at the #1 spot is the Flatwoods Monster, a creature that is long since thought to be an alien in origin, and not a cryptid as some have said, and one of my favorite cryptid stories of all time. The Flatwoods Monster was first sighted in West Virginia because of course it was. That's where all the weird stuff lives in the United States. West Virginia is nothing but beautiful mountain landscapes and cryptids all the way down. John Denver left all that part out of his music. The Flatwood Monster was described as being 10 feet tall and roughly 4 feet wide. It's described as being more mechanical in nature than it's organic, kind of a Darth Vader deal going on. Its most notable feature is its giant head, 2 gigantic glowing eyes, described as either bright red or bright green, and it's got a big cowl in the shape of a spade behind its big old head, making it look like an alien vampire. Its body was armored with thick vertical pipes, and it's got spindly little arms. That's my favorite little part. The first ever sighting of the Flatwood Monster was in the 50s, 1952 to be specific. 3 boys saw something flailing out of the sky hitting the ground nearby. The boys went home and one of them told their mother that they thought they'd saw something fall from the sky, maybe an asteroid. And it's always a great idea to bring your mom if you think you're gonna go check out an alien. She'll know what to do. They gathered a small search party, just in case, and the group sought out to the farm where the object landed and eventually made their way to the top of the hill, where they saw a large ball of fire and smelled some mist that was making their eyes burn. A person in the search party then noticed that there were 2 bright glowing green eyes that were floating around in the trees, and he flashed his light to unveil what was hiding in the dark. They were then treated to a full view of the Flatwoods Monster in all of its glory. The creature then hissed at them and flew upwards into the night, never to be seen again. Now, over the years, detractors have claimed that the Flatwood Monster could just have easily been the darkness, playing tricks on susceptible young eyes, and it might have just been a barn owl, and I do kind of see that. It's got a similar enough face shape, but I feel like the size would be hard to misunderstand, plus the mist that was making everybody's eyes burn. I don't know many owls that produce mist, and what fell from the sky. If you ask me, Flatwood sounds way more like it's an alien than it does that it's a barn owl.
Number 5. The NASA Photoshop cover-up. The most recent of the incidents on this list is the accusation from prominent UFO hunter Scott C. Waring that NASA is editing archival photos to remove alien craft in an effort to hide the existence of extraterrestrials from the people of Earth. As evidence of this, he posted a photo from the 1968 Apollo 7 mission that he claims shows a UFO on his blog, saying that the craft he saw in 2013 had been edited out of the photo by 2015. As he himself put it, "Guys, I discovered this UFO back in 2013 and NASA used my website to edit it out by 2015. Now I have found them in the US National Archives. They have accidentally saved the original Apollo 7 photo with the UFO in it. The photo in question shows a black object seemingly floating below the Apollo 7 spacecraft and above the planet. The supposedly edited photo does not show the small black object." Waring expressed his concerns in the following quote, "This is 100% proof that NASA used my discoveries and used photo editing software to edit out the UFO and then add a lot of contrast to the original photo to cover up most of the detail. Then, to top it off, they no longer have the largest 5 megabyte size to download, but instead only have a tiny thumbnail of about 200 kilobytes in size. Its reduced size in quality has destroyed its usefulness. NASA has to be stopped. This kind of cover-up is very corrupt and deceitful. To not not only the American public, but the world. Despite these claims, the black mark can be seen in other official versions of the photo, and according to analog film experts, they say it is likely just an imperfection in the photo negative. As they put it, irregular shaped dull marks or roundish spots on the surface of your film are likely to be drying marks, caused by the droplets of water forming in the film's surface during the drying stage. These marks are typically seen on the film backing. Films washed in hard water areas are more likely to see this problem. Is NASA really altering photos in their archives in order to cover up alien life? Possibly. Is this an example of them doing so? I'm not entirely convinced. Number 4. The space fireflies. During the race to the moon between the United States and the Soviet Union, one of the landmark moments of the race was the Mercury Atlas 6 mission, when American astronaut John Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth. As important as this moment was in the history of space exploration, it is better remembered by UFO enthusiasts for what Glenn saw out of his window during the mission. While Glenn was flying over Australia in the Friendship 7 capsule, he looked out the window and saw what he later described as fireflies. Upon seeing this, he radioed the following back to NASA Mission Control. "I am in a big mass of some very small particles that are brilliantly lit up like they're luminescent. They look like little stars." Glenn then tapped on the window, and the fireflies seemed to react and flew away. NASA was of course worried that this was parts of the capsule heat shield collapsing, but thankfully for Glenn, this was not the case. Because the mission wasn't being broadcast live, the firefly story didn't get much media attention, being somewhat of an urban legend. However, when the next American in space, Scott Carpenter, also reported seeing the luminescent particles, NASA had an excuse at the ready, saying that it was caused by ice particles from the condensation of the ship's heat exchanger. While to most this would sound like a plausible explanation, John Glenn maintained until the day he died that what he saw could not be explained by ice particles. What did John Glenn see out his capsule window during the 1962 Mercury Atlas mission? Was it really ice particles? Or is NASA trying to hide the truth from the people of Earth? Was John Glenn right? Is it a coincidence that multiple James Bond films were also directed by a man named John Glenn? We may never know. Number 3. Shuttle Atlantis' close encounter. In an age of internet and live broadcasts, it is getting harder and harder to prevent information from reaching the public, with it usually being only a matter of time before secrets find their way out of the shadows and into the light. Such is the case in our next entry, which happened in 2006 during the STS-115 mission of the Shuttle Atlantis to aid in the construction of the International Space Station. The shuttle and its crew had successfully completed its mission and had almost completed the trip back to Earth when Mission Commander Brent Jett looked out the window and noticed, as he put it, some kind of reflective structure. He radioed Mission Control and told them what he saw, telling them that what he was looking at, quote, "didn't look like anything I've ever seen outside of this shuttle, that's for sure." NASA was worried that whatever the object was, it might be some crucial part of the craft that had broken off. They took control of the cameras that were broadcasting the mission to try and get a look at what Commander Jett had seen. To the shock of all the cameras, it saw 3 bright objects in the sky. The information was picked up by the media, and NASA scrambled to come up with a suitable explanation. They ordered an inspection of the craft to see if it was a broken off part of the ship as they had assumed, but could not find any evidence of damage. When the ship returned to Earth, another inspection was ordered, but once again, no damage other than a small micrometeor impact was found. NASA has never been able to explain what happened during this mission, and seem to have made no effort at all to solve the mystery in the years since. Or do they already know what happened, and simply do not want us to be in on the secret? As disturbing as that prospect may be, it would not surprise me to learn that it is the truth. Number 2. Gordon Cooper's alien adventures. Gordon Cooper is an important figure in the history of space travel, having served as an aerospace engineer, a test pilot, a pilot for the United States Air Force, and being the youngest of the 7 original Project Mercury astronauts. He was the first American to spend a day in space, the first to sleep in space, and was the last American to go on a solo orbital mission, and set the space endurance record when he traveled 3,312,993 miles in 190 hours in in 56 minutes, thus proving that astronauts could survive in space for the length of time that would be required to travel to the moon and back. He was an extremely important historical figure, but unlike many other NASA astronauts, he was not shy about talking about the various experiences he had over the years with unidentified flying objects, and the government's effort to cover these experiences up. Gordon Cooper claimed that he had seen his first UFO while flying over West Germany in 1951, but that his first experience with government cover-ups came in 1957 while he was stationed at the Edwards Air Force Base in California. He had put a crew in charge of setting up an Ascania cinetheodolite, which is a photographic instrument used for collecting trajectory data of aircraft, missiles, rockets, and other similar equipment. The equipment was set up on a dry lake bed and set to take pictures at 30 frames per second as aircraft landed. The men later reported to Cooper that they had seen something odd and had captured images of a strange-looking saucer-like aircraft that hadn't made any sound while landing or taking off. The men were used to seeing experimental aircraft, but were unnerved at the sight of this saucer, which had hovered over them, landed about 50 yards away using 3 extended landing gears, but had taken off when they had approached for a closer look. Cooper called a special Pentagon number, which was meant for reporting such phenomena, and was told to have the film developed, to make no prints of it, and to send it to them in a locked courier pouch. However, as Cooper would later admit, they hadn't told him not to look at the negative before sending them out. He looked at them and saw incredibly high-quality images of the flying saucer. He had expected there to be a follow-up investigation, but never heard anything further. He tried to track down what happened to the images, but never found out, assuming that they ended up in the Air Force's Project Blue Book, which was the Air Force's official UFO investigation. He had to deal with more government concealment, this time from NASA, when he did his solo orbital mission in 1963. While being broadcast live on NBC, Cooper told Mission Control that he could see a glowing green object which was rapidly approaching his craft. The object was not an illusion and even showed up on radar, but when he returned to Earth, he was forbidden to talk about the experience any further with the press. The reporters brought in for the subsequent press conference for the mission were also told that they could not ask Cooper about the green orb either. Years later, Cooper would talk about this encounter more openly and discuss the fact that NASA and other government agencies were covering up several stories of UFO encounters. He even spoke to the United Nations on the subject, saying, "Authority is afraid that people may think of God knows what kind of horrible invaders, so the password still is, we have to avoid panic by all means." Did Gordon Cooper really see multiple UFOs during his life? And if so, did NASA and the Air Force prevent the public from learning about these visitors from another planet in an effort to avoid panic? Will there ever be a point in history where they trust the people of the world to be able to handle such news? Much like the identity of the flying saucer's pilots, it is unknown. Number 1. Did we even go to the moon? As we bring our video to a close, we must talk about one of the most popular NASA cover-up theories out there. While several people are convinced that NASA has come across evidence of alien life that they are keeping from us, or that they have even managed to make contact with extraterrestrials, there is still an inherent level of trust involved in those theories. The idea that NASA is covering up such evidence relies on the belief that NASA has really managed to send men to space. However, there are a significant number of people who don't even trust that this occurred, believing that man has never set foot on the moon. In the interest of fairness, let's explore this theory further. The gist of the theory is that while the United States and Russia were racing to see who could get to the moon first, the United States government built a set and filmed fake astronauts pretending to walk on the moon, broadcasting the footage across the world and effectively ending the space race in their favor. Some theories even say that famous director Stanley Kubrick was hired after the impressive special effects in his science fiction film 2001: A Space Odyssey caught the eye of the US government. He was apparently hired to direct the allegedly fake moon landing. The evidence that people have latched onto over the years include shadows in photos that don't line up how people think they should, claims that the astronauts could not survive the Earth's radiation field, the lack of stars in the moon landing photos, and the infamous American flag that they claim appears to be flopping in the wind despite the lack of wind on the moon. Most, if not all of this evidence has been explained by NASA, but once someone is convinced that the moon landings are fake, no explanation from NASA is going to convince them. Whether the moon landing is real or not, it is a good example of how the public's trust in a government institution can erode to the point where some people feel like they can't even take the most basic bits of information provided by NASA for granted.
Number 5. The Navy pilots. Since the release of the UAP documents, the new nomenclature, UFO fever has been in the air more than ever since Roswell. We've got open confirmation that the US government, the Pentagon, is researching actively the possibility of alien craft outright. That's the craziest thing that's ever happened in my life. In September 2019, Navy spokesperson Joe Gradisher confirmed that 3 recently released videos by the military contain evidence of unidentified aerial phenomenon. Like, that's it. This is the Navy, the government pointing to a video and going, yeah, that's an unidentified flying object that we don't know about. They're not saying it's a weather balloon. They're not saying it's stars. They're not outright saying it's an alien, but they're certainly implying it. The Navy agreed that they would confirm the sightings this time because pilots encounter bizarre sightings all the time, but are usually too concerned to report the sightings because of the stigma attached to previous theories about what may or may not be in those videos. Put gently, it means that the Navy felt like they had to comment on this thing so that pilots would feel comfortable admitting that maybe they're seeing UFOs without feeling like a tinfoil hat wearing conspiracist. The videos in question include reports from the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences, released from 2017 to 2018. They feature long, oblong-shaped objects captured with infrared that appear in the Earth's atmosphere before rapidly disappearing from view. Now, really interestingly here is these aren't the only pill-shaped cylindrical UFOs that have been spotted recently. There were 2 videos from 2015 that came out, and before that there was a Navy case involving these in 2004, and even on the rest of this list you'll see a cylindrical cigar-shaped UFO in a sighting from the 40s. So this sort of thing does happen a lot. Now, the purpose of the Navy investigating all this stuff, it's more focused on safety hazard and threats of national security, but hey, at the same time, they may not be willing to talk about it so brazenly, but they definitely are checking just a little bit to make sure they are aliens. But they definitely know more than they're letting on. This footage released only makes up a tiny fraction of what the US Navy and other service branches encounter. One pilot, Lieutenant Graves, claims that in his 10 years flying for the Navy, he thinks he's probably encountered, I don't know, thousands of UFOs in his time. Those are his words. Now, who is to say how many of those might just actually be unidentified flying objects, birds, scouts, drones, whatever, but who's to say how many of them really were alien craft from outside the planet? And my friends, if you're looking to educate yourself on the matter of extraterrestrials, UAPs, UFOs, well, you've got to know by now Top 5 Scary is the place to be. I see the viewer stats in the videos. You goblins love when we talk about aliens. Well, if you want to keep loving them, click on through. We've got more unexplained sightings in the sky than the CIA. And if you want them delivered hot and fresh, you can subscribe and get them before anybody else. Number 4. Childs Whitted Case. The Childs Whitted encounter is one of the most recognized UFO encounters in American history for how surprisingly credible it seems. It happened shortly after the Roswell incident, when UFO fever was hot on everybody's minds in the States, and it was showing. The sighting occurred in the morning hours of one July 24th, 1948. The 2 pilots, one Clarence Childs and John Whitted, were flying approximately 5,000 feet above Montgomery, Alabama on a clear, normal night. Flight was going well, nothing too exciting, but at around 2:45 in the morning, Childs saw something peculiar. He noticed a dull red glowing light above and ahead of the aircraft, and it wasn't even remotely near Christmas, so it wasn't Rudolph leading the sleigh. He told Whitted that it must be a new type of army jet that was flying in front of them that neither of them had ever seen. They wanted to get a better look at it, and in a matter of seconds, well, they would, when the object flew past the right side of their plane and pulled up with a tremendous burst of flame protruding from its rear, and it zoomed upwards and onwards into the clouds. The 2 pilots described the object looking like a flying cigar with a cylindrical chassis and 2 decks and windows. Besides the 2 pilots, one passenger on the flight, one C.L. McKelvey, insisted that during his flight he saw a bright streak of red flashing lights by one of his windows. Now, Childs and Whitted were obviously pretty darn confused by whatever it was they'd saw. Didn't look like no plane they'd seen before, and the way it moved seemed technologically more advanced than anything the US Army was putting out in the late 40s. Now, the US Army proper would challenge this account, and their scientists insisted. They investigated the report and said that it was probably just a meteor the pilots and passengers had seen, which almost sounds like it might make sense until you stop and think about it for a second, because what meteor has windows and a glowing red light coming from it and propels itself forward and rapidly goes upward? Most meteors I've ever heard of go downwards. And Childs and Whitted both disagreed with this as well, saying they got a good long look at it and it wasn't a meteor. Whatever it truly was, though, might be lost to history. tragically. Number 3, the Gander Newfoundland encounter. Our next story comes to us from Gander, Newfoundland, and it happened on February 10, 1951. A U.S. Naval Reserve lieutenant and pilot Graham Bethune was occupying the captain's seat of a plane flying near Newfoundland, Canada, when he spotted something unusual, massive, and rapidly approaching towards the plane. It resembled a disc. The co-pilot made a report of what he saw, and this is what he wrote. Take a listen. I observed a glow of light below the horizon about 1,000 to 1,500 feet above the water. The pilot and I observed its course and motion for about 4 or 5 minutes before calling it to the attention of the other crew members. Suddenly, the object changed direction at an incredible speed and began to pulsate, changing its colors as well. Then, it somehow reversed its course and tripled its speed until at last it disappeared over the horizon. The report would go on to say that whatever this object was, it came within 5 miles of the aircraft, which was proven later by radar evidence. Now, when the plane had landed, the entire crew was detained by intelligence officers and interrogated. At their destination, pilot and passengers were questioned again by naval intelligence and required to sign full disclosure documents. Now, take this next part with a grain of salt. Okay? Because I only found one source on this. But apparently a CIA scientist confidentially interviewed the pilot, and during their interrogation, he showed him a photo of a disc-like object that looked extremely similar to the one they had seen flying over the Atlantic. However, during the interviews, no Navy, Air Force, or CIA men would ever answer any questions related to extraterrestrials. No one would say the word alien, no one was saying UFO, nothing like that. They were trying very hard to downplay that. So what was it then? Because it sounds incredibly suspicious that the interviewers had a photo of something that looked similar to it and weren't saying the word alien at all. Number 2, November 1986 Japanese Airlines flight. Our next one comes to us from a pair of Japanese pilots. In November 1986, Japanese Airlines Flight 1628 was heading over Alaska. Captain Kenju Terauchi and a crew of 2 others were on a flight making routine cargo deliveries to France. Captain Terauchi saw something that caught his attention when he saw blinding lights flashing off at the left and the right of the plane. Now, initially he didn't think too much of it. He thought, hey, maybe these are just US fighter jets zipping around. As his plane furthered forward, he realized that the object was flying ahead of him was of the unidentified variety, a UFO, if you will. Terauchi said that it looked like 2 spaceships had stopped in front of their faces, shooting off lights. The inside cockpit shined brightly, and I felt warm in the face, he wrote. That almost sounds kind of pleasant, to be honest. Captain Terauchi described the objects as being cuboid-shaped spaceships with a jet propulsion system that had horizontal lines of circular exhausts clustered around a dark center. The captain had also reported that when the plane had flown by this object, ground communications were cut out and all radar was blocked. Well, that's kind of odd, isn't it? Pretty interesting. Well, if you thought that was weird, the FAA would agree with it. That's the Federal Aviation Administration, who investigated the report very closely, interrogating Terauchi for everything they could out of the incident. Now, during this questioning, his co-pilot and his flight engineer, they said that they thought the object they saw was just strange lights, but they did agree that they really couldn't easily explain what it was they saw. In the end, the FAA ruled that what it was light refraction through ice crystals suspended in clouds. A bunch of science words. Sure. Number 1, Lieutenant Gorman. Our number 1 spot on this list is a humdinger of a tale. Now, most of us can only hope to maybe someday see a UFO in our lives, but I mean, maybe if you were like me and you watched Star Wars way too many times and you still ask the hairdressers to get your hair cut like Luke Skywalker, not like anybody I know. Maybe you dream of flying an X-Wing through the stars, dodging lasers, getting into a cool alien dogfight. It's a shame none of us can claim we've done that, except, you know, George Gorman of the North Dakota National Guard. I don't think anyone would expect there to be anything exciting happening in North Dakota, but one of the best UFO encounters in American history did. Let's take a little listen and learn about it. It was 1948, a year after the New Mexico Roswell incident, while people were still hyper-focused on little gray men and flying saucers. Lieutenant Gorman was flying a fighter jet solo around the skies above Fargo when he saw what he thought was an aircraft around 500 feet below him. He radioed his tower, but the operator told him that there weren't any other planes to be around and that it was a suspicious vehicle. So Gorman told the tower back he was going to investigate the situation and flew in within 1,000 yards to try and positively ID the subject. Gorman said it looked to be about 6 to 8 inches, clear white and completely round without fuzz at the edges, and it was blinking on and off. As I approached, the light suddenly became steady and pulled into a sharp left bank. I thought it was making a pass at the tower. Gorman then said he thought the light charged at him. He didn't want to be the first pilot to crash into a UFO, so he readied himself to avoid it, but found the object suddenly shot straight upwards in the air, directly above him, and then disappearing disappearing into the clouds. Gorman tried his best to pull up to follow along, but his plane went into a stall while he was trailing it and the entity had vanished. Back at the air tower, 2 traffic controllers reported they also saw a light flying above the airstrip they couldn't explain and weren't present on any flight logs. Gorman was questioned about what he saw, and he said he was convinced that it wasn't just a light, that it moved too naturally, that it moved like it was reacting to his movements, as if it was playing a game with him. He said there was thought and precision behind all its maneuvers. We should ask it what it thought about all of that if Gorman was moving too naturally, reacting to all of that. Number 5. Let's start off with a bang and get a good one for you right off the bat. I like to save these ones for last, but with this compilation, pretty much all of the sightings I've found for you today are winners. This clip is short and sweet, so let's play as much of it as we can. Posted to Twitter from the account UFO Twitter. From what we can make out, we see something barreling through the skies at top speeds, looking faster than just about anything any human tech could put out. It's got a bit of like a football shape to it almost, and I'll shout out my favorite comment on the video underneath, which says, "Looks like Uncle Rico finally threw that football over the mountain." Little Napoleon Dynamite throwback for you. Whatever it is definitely looks weird. You know, it looks to me more like it's possibly some hyper advanced spy craft or military drone than it could be any weather balloon. Having watched it roughly 30 million times over, pausing every frame like I'm a CSI investigator and I'm pressing my nose right up against the monitor, I noticed that there's a white curved surface on the black shell of the craft, almost looking like it could be a dome for a pilot. I can't make it anything on the inside, of course, but it does give off the impression that the craft is manned or aliened. I don't know what the correct verbiage is here. Something else I noticed in my freeze frame play-by-play of the video is that it almost looks as if the craft has some sort of writing on the back of it. You know, if it was just CGI, I doubt that someone would go to that length just to fool some folks on Twitter, but hey, never doubt the power of boredom and access to video editing software. So, folks back at home, what do we think about this one? Spy plane, some new advanced military technology, your run-of-the-mill balloon, or just some very, very convincing computer handiwork? And if you're looking for more UFO clips to squint at, well, Top 5 Scary has all of that and then some. Just in this one series of videos alone, I've collected 20 clips of UFOs, all from this year, that you should check out. And again, that's just this series alone. If this is your first time coming on in, welcome. You'll see we've got videos on cursed objects, ghosts, paranormal activities, cryptids, and honestly a whole lot more. Just about everything scary under the sun. There's a world of scares out there, so subscribe, stay scared, but check that out after this video, okay? We worked really hard on this one. Number 4, Bondi Beach. Our next video comes to us from the land down under, so you might need to flip your phone or your monitor, your tablet or whatever upside down to get a good look at the UFO. Maybe that'll help. See if that gets it there for you. Caught on Bondi Beach by TikTok user DJ Just, we've got a pretty clear view of something strange flying across the beautiful blue Australian sky. Now in this clip we can see something shiny, round, and reflective making its way up there, tailed behind by a black helicopter. Looks to be kind of small, maybe the size big enough for one person or maybe 3 or 4 little green men depending on how compact they are. I want to know if that helicopter is a coincidence or if it's responding to this UAP, you know, coming in to recover it, make contact. Now commenters on the video suggested that it could very well be a weather balloon passing through, and it's definitely likely. That's what it turns out to be, like 99.9% of all UFO sightings. But if it was a weather balloon, you know, surely it would have been shot down during that little welcoming party where we were shooting down weather balloons all over the globe, right? Kidding. Another commenter suggested kind of reasonably that it could be a plane because there is a military base fairly close by to Bondi Beach, which would make some sense. Might even explain that helicopter coming in near the end there. Unfortunately, this clip is a little more zoomed out than some of the other ones on here, so it's not the easiest to say what's going on here, but I kind of feel like that's half the fun with UFO clips, isn't it? You know, trying to figure out what's going on. It's like a little guessing game. Let's hear what you all think down there. Is this aliens trying to touch down in Sydney? Or just something perfectly reasonable? I know which one I would infinitely prefer it to be. It's the aliens, in case you were wondering. It's aliens. Number 3, Canada. I had to include this next clip. I just had to. Yes, it's a very cool clip, but mostly it was taken from my hometown. Mississauga, baby! No one famous has ever come from there, so there might be a halfway decent chance I could be Mississauga's biggest star as I spend my days endlessly watching the stars. Enough talk about the Greater Toronto Area's greatest borough. Let's take a look at some more UAP clips. Coming in next is a clip posted to Reddit, simply titled, "Weird object seen flying over Mississauga," and it is hard to disagree. Why don't you take a little look-see for me? I mean, look at it. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to say that just looking at it won't tell you. What on earth is going on here? What I love about this clip is that this one doesn't even remotely look like anything else I've seen in a minute. This doesn't look like a weather balloon or a flying saucer. I don't even know where you'd start describing this one, really. This one looks like it's a UFO Rorschach test, I think. You take a look at it and reveal some element of your personality. I kind of see a little spaceman, like a little Among Us guy, hovering around on a jetpack. The way it moves really gets me too. It seems erratic and alive, less like it's being controlled and more like something's fighting the controls here. Now, I always like to listen to both sides of every story when it comes to UFO sighting content, and one user in the comments here suggested that he was pretty certain that this was just a Mr. Peanut balloon being let loose, and I have to admit I kind of see it. I don't know if you want to throw up a photo of Mr. Peanut here. I just think it's absolutely hilarious if this UFO sighting is really just a sighting of a giant floating lagoon. I'll leave it to my commenters to decide. You're my best and brightest. How are we feeling on this clip? Is this something weird in the sky? Proof of travelers from beyond the stars experimenting with some new technology that we couldn't possibly understand? Bigger than any of us? Bigger than this galaxy? Or is this just a bit of advertising for a salty snack from the Planters Corporation? Either truth is horrifying. Number 2, best UFO clip. Our next video was posted to TikTok by the user UFO Tracker. Good, we need somebody tracking that. And the caption says it's the best UFO sighting caught on camera. It's definitely pretty good, I'll give him that. But I'm putting it at the number 2 spot if for nothing else to keep UFO Tracker humble. You know, I want to keep you working hard. But for what it's worth, this is definitely a great clip. Why don't you take a look for me? We can see a flying saucer type looking UFO floating around in the sky, almost looking a bit like a perfect sphere. You know, it looks like it's got a glowing light in the middle. If anyone out there is an Apex Legends fan, immediately I said it looks exactly like a cargo bot, and you should consider shooting it down for some loot. And someone in the comments said the exact same thing, so hey, gamer minds think alike, or however that saying goes. Just as it seems like we might be able to get a good glimpse of whatever is happening up there in the sky, a fleet of what looks like a bunch of military vessels show up, presumably just to take care of what is just a weather balloon, right? Now, a lot of people in the comments on this one were more skeptical than usual, I noticed, with most of the commenters suggesting that this was either a balloon or a drone. One of the comments posted bemoaning how good CGI is getting, saying, "I don't believe anything I see on video anymore." Another one saying, with how good CGI is getting, it's harder and harder to tell the real from the fakes. I mean, I get it, we are getting pretty good. I'm not even a real person, I'm just an AI generation that does these videos for you. This clip does look pretty fantastical. The only trouble is I couldn't really find a location of where this was happening. If this was footage of one of those strange objects that have been shot down recently over the sky in the US or not, who knows? Maybe this footage was absolutely never meant to be seen, and I just got the whole office marked for surveillance, as if we're not already. My Google search history is enough to have me on like 4 different agency watch lists. It's nothing but alien videos, skinwalkers, Bigfoot sightings, and recommendations for local frozen yogurt places. And number 1, above the Pentagon. Now, you know I try to save the best for last for you guys. So here's one that I thought really stood out. I like to give you guys a little reward for sitting through the video. Good on you. Someone was recording driving down near Washington, D.C., and they spotted something incredibly bizarre moving through the clouds by the Pentagon of all places. It's hard to make out at all what's happening here, but in the clouds we can see something gigantic, like behemoth size. Almost looking like a pyramid or an Imperial Star Destroyer floating through the clouds. It seems too as if it's almost like cloaking in and out sometimes. Maybe I'm just crazy, maybe I'm too tired, maybe I've had too much coffee or not enough. But man, I love a UFO clip where while you're watching it, you just scratch your head and throw your arms up and go, yeah, I have absolutely no idea what's going on here. That could definitely be aliens. This giant cheese wedge shaped thing in the sky certainly raises some eyebrows. It's way too big to be a drone. It's way too triangular to be a balloon. So just what is it, eh? Something about it being near the Pentagon too also sets off more than a few alarms in my head. Could it be that, you know, whatever this is trying to make contact with the people who'd be most likely to be reaching out? What's interesting too is triangular UFOs actually come up way more often than you think. I'd say more than flying saucers even. As someone who's seen maybe, 30,000 UFO clips in my lifetime, that's a rough estimate, I can tell you a lot of the really good ones and encounters describe these big triangular ships like this. Now, commenters on this video were fairly stumped, with most just agreeing in amazement that whatever this was that was being caught on camera was definitely head-turning. A pretty funny comment that stood out for me on this one was someone asking, if you saw this, why wouldn't you pull over? More important than whenever you were going. And I kind of agree. Maybe we could have had the perfect UFO evidence footage if the driver was just willing to stop in the middle of the highway and get out and start recording. Some people are so inconsiderate. Number 5, the Roswell autopsy. Perhaps one of the most famous pieces of lost alien footage is the infamous Roswell autopsy tape. Maybe you've heard of it. If you're a UFO enthusiast like me, no doubt it's come up before at some point. Roswell was kind of the birthplace of UFO mania, where a lot of the first conspiracy theories and a lot of the public ideas we have about aliens really stem from. If you don't know somehow, the story goes that an alien craft crash landed in Roswell, New Mexico, where it was swiftly apprehended by shadowy government agents looking to pull a curtain over the whole thing. Reverse engineered, studied, down to the pilot of the craft, recovered by FBI scientists. Almost immediately after, hushed whispers and rumors of a recorded alien autopsy set conspiracists and enthusiasts' mind ablaze in equal measures. Recorded footage of an alien body being dissected would be undeniable proof with world-shattering consequences, and would probably make for some pretty good ratings. Well, the Fox network would agree with you, because in 1995, the footage was broadcasted on Fox, presented by legendary thespian and #1 guide to trust in regards to human-alien relations, one Jonathan Frakes. The film broadcast was not the true footage of the autopsy, but rather a high-budget recreation to show for a wider public audience what had happened. The director claims he had seen the original footage from the 1947 autopsy, but couldn't release it. He claims that he spliced shots from the original footage into the faked footage to provide some clarity, but didn't tell us what was real and what wasn't. And he insists that the video wasn't faked, but rather a reconstruction for educational purposes. Now, despite only being a reenactment, the special effects of the footage are remarkable. It does look pretty believable. It was helmed by industry legend Stan Winston, the special effects warlock responsible for bringing the Predator and the aliens alike. The alien body in the footage was filled with sheep guts, chicken entrails, pig knuckles, and raspberry jam to create the illusion of an alien filled to bursting with foreign organs, and probably tasted halfway decent with a little bit of soy sauce. So was the footage ever actually real, or was it all just cooked up to sweep up viewers on a dwindling TV season? The director maintains always that what he saw was real, he just wasn't allowed to show it, and did his best to show us what happened. There's an interesting discussion to be had there, I think. Was he just showing how easy it is to fraud something, manipulate people into believing whatever they see? Who's to say if the true footage ever did come out, we would even believe it? We would probably just dismiss it the exact same way. But if you want to see way more scary footage, real or not, dismissible or provable, we have got loads and loads of that for you to enjoy. So click through, stay a while, and get scared all night long with Top 5 Scary. I'll be here the whole night and in this building. Number 4, Edgar Mitchell. The thing about most alien sightings is that they don't always come from the most reputable of sources. It's usually a random internet post, maybe a blurry shot from an iPhone kind of thing, posted on Reddit with a caption like, "What is this?" Or, it's somebody who was walking home late at night and saw some lights in the sky and didn't know it was a plane. And while I think we should respect the voice of the people and the common man, it'd be nice if we got someone with a little bit of clout to their name. Well, luckily we've got more than a few astronauts who've seen bizarre things up there and are willing to share their stories. Edgar Mitchell is one such man. He's stood on the face of the moon before, he helped save the Apollo 14 mission from becoming a disaster, he's the 6th man to ever walk on the moon, and he is a lifelong defender and believer in aliens and UFOs. Mitchell claims that he's seen things that prove existence of life outside the planet. First and foremost, he is a firm believer of the Roswell conspiracy, and he insists that all those stories are true, and that the military has been hiding the truth behind what happened at Roswell for decades, adding on to say that it was buried, and the military propagated a covert movement to discredit everything that had happened at Roswell, to deter people from taking any news about UFOs and flying saucers seriously, dismissing it forever as tinfoil hat stuff. Mitchell claims that NASA believes the public wouldn't be able to handle the truth. Come on! We're ready. We're ready, we're all ready, we're big enough now to know the truth. It's like the tooth fairy, we're grown up, we know where the quarters are coming from, just tell us. And Edgar Mitchell's been trying to just tell us. In 2004, Edgar Mitchell told a Floridan newspaper that he knew there was a secret cabal inside the American government that took in and studied alien corpses, and that after JFK was removed from office, the group did not answer to the president and didn't include the commander-in-chief in their briefings. He was quoted saying, "They all know that UFOs are real. The question is where they are coming from. A shadowy organization existing outside the president's control with insider knowledge on aliens and trying to suppress the public." Did Mr. Mitchell just casually confirm the Men in Black are real? Now, NASA themselves obviously denied all of Mitchell's statements, but obviously they would. What government is going to throw their hands up and admit that they have been slicing up alien bodies on the side? Number 3, the first flying saucer. Now, while the Roswell, New Mexico incident was the UFO sighting that really shot alien sightings into the mainstream public consciousness and kind of defined what alien sightings look like, you know, the idea of little gray or green men and flying saucers, it was obviously far from the first alien sighting ever recorded, just kind of the most popular. But not even a few weeks earlier, there was actually another famous sighting, and one that's thought to be the progenitor for sightings of UFOs being thought of as flying saucers. Kenneth Arnold was an American aviator. Unlike most UFO sightings, Kenneth never changed his story once, never made any kind of surrealist, outrageous claims, and stuck to the same story for the rest of his life. He saw weird saucers in the air he couldn't explain. Well, let's take a listen. It was 1947, June the 24th, weeks before Roswell, which occurred in July 1947. Mr. Arnold was flying his private plane over Washington by Mount Rainier. I've never been to Washington, so you guys gotta forgive me. He was looking for a recently downed transport plane that had a $5,000 bounty the US military was offering in exchange for its finding. As he was approaching the summit, Arnold noticed that he saw 9 blinding flashes of light hovering up above. When looking in closer, they resembled ships but looked like discs. Arnold said that he saw them flying in a bizarre pattern, with each position diagonally together, reporting that it reminded him of the tail of a kite. Arnold was an aviation expert and said that the craft seemed far more advanced than anything human beings were capable of at the time, moving at unbelievable speeds. He landed at a nearby airport and told crew that he saw something bizarre he couldn't rationalize, worried that perhaps it could have been missiles being fired at Washington. Reporters interviewed him and he was pressed for several questions, but no one could corroborate or figure out just exactly what it was he had seen. Arnold was questioned by the Army as well, who took his claims remarkably seriously, as he was a fairly respected and reputable man, and there wasn't really the same culture surrounding aliens and UFOs, and as such, his claim was met with genuine worry. No one ever figured it out, but the story of them being saucers, combined with the saucers seen in New Mexico, led to the public perception of UFOs picturing them as saucers for the better part of 60 years, pretty much to this day. Number 2, the Travis Walton abduction. Now, abduction stories can sometimes be a little much to believe, even for those with the most open minds who want to believe. You know, they all seem kind of the same. It's somebody you maybe can't trust driving home late at night, saw something strange, they woke up in a blinding light room and they got poked and prodded by little gray men. Well, Travis Walton's story is not dissimilar to that. It's pretty out there even by abduction standards, but it's too juicy to pass up, so pop open those ears. In 1975, Travis Walton was working as a logger and was facing a fairly routine day, 6 other loggers and him driving around in the forest, when they saw something incredibly bright shining at them through the treetops. One of the men claimed it looked like a flattened disc, a saucer of sorts even. Walton stepped out of the bed of the truck to investigate and was struck by some invisible force that knocked him backwards. The rest of the crew panicked and drove away. Huge faux pas, I'll say, leaving your coworker behind after being struck by an alien, but okay, you think you know somebody. When the crew returned, Walton had vanished. Walton awoke and had thought that he'd been taken to a hospital because he'd found himself in a blindingly bright room and could hear people moving around him. But it wasn't until he got a good look at his doctors that he knew something was amiss. 3 feet tall, with brown, quarter-sized pupils, with marshmallow-like skin. Walton freaked out, obviously, as one would probably do, and was swiftly restrained by his captors. He tried to fight them off, but was greeted by a tall creature he said resembled a humanoid, but was masked by an intimidating helmet, a kind of Darth Vader looking thing. The masked creature took Walton and escorted him back into the operating room and put a translucent mask over his face. And Walton drifted out of consciousness again, unsure if anything was real. The next thing he remembers is walking alongside a highway as if nothing had ever happened. He eventually finds his way to a phone and called his brother-in-law, who panically asked what had happened. It turned out that Walton had been gone for 5 days, and he was untraceable. Search parties had formed looking for him, sent dogs and choppers tracked him from the woods, but no one could find any sign of him, as if he'd blinked out of existence and then blinked right back. Travis swore what happened to him was real, a real abduction, and he's maintained that story ever since that fateful week in 1975. Now, if you think this story is fascinating and you're upset that nobody recorded any of it and there wasn't any footage of what Travis described, well, the tragic news is, yeah, it doesn't exist. You can, however, watch a 90s sci-fi movie that is directly based off Travis's case called Fire in the Sky. I've never seen it, but I'm sure it's on Amazon Prime or something. It's got Robert Patrick from Terminator 2. He's in it. He's a good actor. Yeah, check it out. And number 1, the Rendlesham Forest Incident. The incident and conspiracy at Roswell, New Mexico is one of the most famous events in UFO culture. This incident is considered England's Roswell, the Rendlesham Forest Incident. Few other alien sightings can boast this many government witnesses, memos, and strange proof. Let's paint the scene. It was December 26, 1980. Oh, nice and festive and Christmas themed. Surrounding Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk, England was a series of Air Force bases and US Army personnel. 2 of these stationed officers were John Burroughs and Jim Peniston. On this fateful night, the 2 of them were concerned by shining bright lights that were seen flying above the base, worrying that it could perhaps have been a threat or a spy plane scouting out their location. Burroughs said that he thought the lights looked like a beacon summoning people over, and over 40 people on the base all agreed, reporting seeing the lights and sharing their concerns. So the 2 men were sent over to Rendlesham Forest to investigate. In their official document, the 2 men claimed that they had seen a strange, shining, triangular object that was pulsing with colored lights. Neither of the men recognized it as an aircraft from any military across the globe. The craft had seemed far too advanced for anything of this world. Black and made out of a smooth, opaque glass. It didn't appear to have any wings or landing gear or even really any methods of propulsion or exhaust. The men describe it as covered in hieroglyphic-like symbols etched onto the hull of the vessel all over. Neither of the men could identify the glyphs as anything they'd seen before. Duh, it's alien stuff. As the craft touched down, nearby animals were being driven into a frenzy, and the airmen's equipment started malfunctioning, communications equipment cutting out. The 2 personnel could no longer call back to the base. Now, not even 2 days later, the Rendlesham UFO was spotted again. 2 days later, the same strange lights were seen hovering above the bases surrounding Rendlesham. This time, the crews came significantly more prepared, waiting and ready for the UFO to make contact. The patrol group had found depressions in the ground, and their Geiger counters started blowing up with noise. And the group had known that they'd come across where the UFO had been, and then, right on time, the patrol saw the same craft flying above overhead, disappearing into the night. Years passed, and we're still no closer to understanding just what occurred at those faithful sightings.
In 5th place today, we have the footage the Pentagon refuses to release from Alaska. Between the dates of February 4th to the 12th of 2023, 4 different unidentified objects were shot down over Alaska, South Carolina, the Yukon, and the Great Lakes. While cockpit audio from F-16 pilots who shot down the UFOs over Lake Huron was released, a spokesman for the Pentagon has confirmed that the footage will not be released in the near future, being quoted directly saying, "I can tell you that there is not currently any images or video footage that we can release. The imagery remains classified, and I have not received any information as to the potential timeline on a change in classification." This refusal is a drastic difference in comparison to the quick release of an Air Force photo of what is believed to have been a Chinese spy balloon that was shot down at the same time over on the East Coast, and footage from when a Russian plane appeared to intentionally collide with a drone last March. Noted UFO researcher John Greenwald requested the footage and photos of the UFO shootdowns be released via a Freedom of Information Act request, with the Pentagon claiming national security exemptions to deny this request. An Air Force official said that the images would reveal cryptology and national security concerns if released, and even the Canadian RCMP are playing coy, having ended their public search for the remains. Now, I don't know about y'all, but that sounds pretty dang suspicious to me. Hey, anyone want to take a random trip to the Yukon just to sightsee? Totally not to recover UFO debris or anything suspicious.
Number 4. The Observatory. In 2007, astronomer Alberto Meyer, living in Busta Arezizo, Italy, and I butchered that pronunciation, made an incredible discovery, almost completely by accident, which is where most scientific progress gets made. He was adjusting the focus of his telescope when he spotted and tracked a UFO as it flew across the surface of the moon. Now, the video shows the portions of the moon that he was focused on in close-up mode while tracking a solid black object as it flew over the surface of the moon. And look, I could just describe what is going on in this video, but I could also let you get your peepers on it and let you decide for yourself. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, so here's roughly 24,000 words worth of context. Take yourself a look. Pretty weird, huh? That round black object is tracked as he catches just after it passing the Wallace crater, and yeah, this is how I'm learning that parts of the moon were named. I didn't know there was moon geography. It hovers and hesitates before making a sudden change of path at an exact 45-degree angle. Take your protractor out. The precision and control is what's giving people pause, you know? It seems to move as if it's being controlled, and with such mechanical dominance that it seems like it has to be something that's being intentionally driven, and not just a strange rock floating through the stars, or I'm gonna be honest, a bug crawling on the lens, which is what I thought it might be. Now, commenters on the video, because this thing went viral when it got posted, pointed out that the object does not decrease in size at all, suggesting that the object isn't close to the moon, and rules out the theory that this is a shadow on the surface of the moon from a large object overneath. I'm only capable of so much, I'm gonna be honest. The science stuff, that's kind of above my pay grade, but I can confirm and offer my speculation on when videos of UFOs look weird, and that's exactly what's going on here. So is this a UFO? Who is to say?
Alrighty, in our third place position, we have the Guy Hotel Memo. It's the most requested document in the FBI's archives, right after the photo of Elvis and Nixon riding with an alien. The file has been checked out roughly 1 million times in the last 2 years alone. So far as cagey cover-ups go, this one's fairly out in the open, but that doesn't make it any less invigorating. It's a single page, an unconfirmed report the FBI never even followed up on. The file in question? It's a memo dated back to March of 1950, authored by one Guy Hotel, who served as the director of the FBI field office in Washington, D.C., addressed to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. In the memo, Hotel was relaying a story seen by an Air Force pilot about something bizarre they had seen in New Mexico, right around the time of Roswell fever. The memo describes flying saucers, circular in shape with raised centers, approximately 50 feet in diameter. It goes on to say that inside each saucer was a flight crew, each occupied by 3 bodies of roughly human shape, but only 3 feet tall, and bandaged in a manner similar to the blackout suits used by speed flyers and test pilots. The memo goes on to claim that the crafts were found because an aircraft radar had interfered with the controlling mechanisms of the saucer, and concludes by saying, no further evaluation was ever attempted. It seems like it should be a significantly bigger deal than that, no? No further evaluation? That's fine. Someone in the Air Force claims that they saw a series of flying saucers, piloted by tiny men in shiny spacesuits not even 3 years after the Roswell incident, set New Mexico news stations ablaze. But hey, it's probably nothing. At least there's some comfort in knowing that the government has always behaved like this when it comes to investigating and reporting on possible UAP and UFO sightings. Now, admittedly, there's no footage or photography of the incident to speak of, and it's a bit more government-approved hearsay. Whatever was seen on that day could have been something huge, or it could have been bogus. I suppose we'll never know, but it is worth mentioning that Project Blue Book was launched not even 2 years later, investigating UFO sightings in the Air Force, so that's all I'm gonna say on the subject.
Number 2, the Ryan Graves Report. Lieutenant Ryan Graves is a studied Air Force pilot. If you're a super big UFO enthusiast, you might even recognize the name. He's an FA-18 Super Hornet pilot who has flown the skies for 10 years and has seen countless UFOs in his time flying for the Navy, seeing all manner of things he couldn't explain. He spoke out saying, "These things would be out here all day. Keeping an aircraft in the air requires a significant amount of energy with the speeds we observed, and 12 hours in the air is about 11 hours longer than we'd expect." Now, one particular incident occurred in late 2014, when a Super Hornet pilot nearly crashed into one of these objects alongside Graves. Some of these objects were caught on plane camera, and we have got some of that footage for you here today. The pilot and his wingman were flying in tandem about 100 feet apart over the Atlantic East when something flew between them. Graves said that the object looked like a sphere encasing a cube, you know, regular shape a plane would be. The pilots were concerned because were these things a covert drone program or something suspicious and secretive, government officials would have at least warned them, since they had fighter jets flying around for fear of collision. This was the reason the Navy was concerned that perhaps there was more to investigate with this particular encounter of unexplained aerial phenomenon. What was truly unsettling the pilots, besides the fact that there was almost a huge safety crash error there, some of that's words, right? And that was that these crafts were accelerating to hypersonic speeds, and then they would stop and turn on a dime, which is not really something the human pilots are capable of, even our best and brightest, Sorry Goose and Maverick. So what did the pilots think they were dealing with? Graves spoke out, saying, "We have helicopters that can hover. We have aircraft that can fly at 30,000 feet and right at the surface, but combine all of that into one vehicle of some type with no jet engine, no exhaust plume. So what do we think, my goblins and my ghouls? This does definitely seem like something worth digging into, doesn't it? Definitely seems suspicious, to say the least.
Finally, in first place, we have the 2004 series of spottings. On November 14th of 2004, Lieutenant Alex Dietrich was piloting her FA-18 Super Hornet when she observed an oblong object hovering over the water. It leapt into motion, skimming 500 to 1,000 feet over the waves at around 500 knots, and for those of us Canadian civilians, that's around 925 kilometers per hour. The fighter jet's onboard radar couldn't detect the object, but Alex's weapons system operator in the rear seat, who, her name's not public, witnessed it as well. Dietrich has quoted her recollection as, "We were trying to call out what we are seeing to each other and to make sure everybody else is seeing it. It's moving so erratically and so fast that our voices, our minds, and then our radio calls can't keep up with it." The majority of credible modern-day UFO sightings can be credited to those that work in the Air Force, and it should be noted that military pilots are trained at what they call REAS, short for reconnaissance, and referring more specifically in this case to the art of recognizing aircraft by their shapes, paint schemes, unit insignia, and more. On one of the other Super Hornets that launched behind Alex was Lieutenant Commander Chad Underwood, who was able to capture the object on an infrared camera. It was 40 feet long, round and smooth, and quickly received the nickname Tic Tac. Now, I'll let the footage that the US government has confirmed as authentic and unexplained speak for itself, since I know we have the clip handy. Around this time, starting on November 10th to be exact, Gary Voorhees, a petty officer on the USS Princeton guided missile cruiser, had been reporting apparitions on his radar screens in the same area. Triple checking his equipment before he made his report, and being the main technician responsible for the equipment, along with having 6 years of Navy experience at the time, Voorhees described what he was seeing as impossible. In just seconds, an object had dropped to the waterline from 60,000 feet, hovered, and then zipped away at high velocity, making right-angle turns that were quoted as being confounding and defying gravity. Calm down, Wicked fans, I know what I said. The objects returned for the next week, with Voorhees quoted as saying, "I was able to see it on the horizon during the night and during the day, and it was definitely a glowing object. Could I tell you for 100% certainty what it was we were tracking? No." Now, footage of this event used to exist, with Gary being able to vividly describe his memories, but has since been completely scrubbed from the internet. Now, where have I heard that before? And there we have it, folks. That's the end of today's list. I have to admit, while I might be slightly more convinced about UFOs, or if I want to use the updated term, UAP, Unexplained Aerial Phenomena existence, I'm not about to drag out my elementary school telescope and spend tonight staring at the sky.
You're in luck, because with the top 5, you don't even need the telescope. We got all the alien footage right here, and we'll see you around, provided neither of us get thrown into the back of a Men in Black's vans for spilling government secrets.
Maybe we should talk in Pig Latin next time for safety?
Number 5. Well, first and foremost, if you were looking for any proof that the government definitely knows more about aliens than they let on, how about from the mouth of the 3-letter organizations themselves? The CIA released a tweet in 2014, obviously was meant to be taken in a joking manner, but still pretty illuminating, saying that throughout the 50s and 60s, they estimate that 50% of all sightings of unexplained aerial phenomena and UFOs were simply the CIA testing new aircraft. Out of context, the CIA admits they were behind 50% of all UFO sightings is an extremely attention-grabbing headline, and probably what I should have named this video. Would have got you to click better. And it is an attention-grabbing headline. At the time they were testing the Lockheed U-2 spy plane, codenamed Dragon Lady, which was able to fly at altitudes thought unreachable by a one-manned aircraft at the time. We know the CIA will always be a little bit more technologically advanced than they're willing to let on. That's just the nature of shadowy governments. But the conspiracy theorist in me has to wonder, is it even just the littlest bit possible that them releasing this could be a misinformation campaign? I mean, this is just what they're willing to admit, right? Who's to say what they won't admit? What if they put stuff like this out there so the next time you see something odd in the sky, you just dismiss it thinking, oh, that's just the CIA testing airplanes, instead of the more logical, reasonable answer that it's an alien spacecraft observing you from up above? And what if all I'm saying is just wild speculating and tinfoil hat level conspiracies because I'm trying to get views on video? It's more likely than you think. But them admitting they're responsible for most UFO sightings intones to me that they're aware of a lot more UFO sightings that are reported. Makes you wonder how much they research them all. Do you think they look at every blurry cell phone camera video posted to Reddit, or just the really serious ones that make the news? I'm hoping to get some answers someday, but I have a feeling that some of those answers are in this video. It won't all be wild speculation, I promise. And hey, if you want to see more alien stuff, click through. We've got boxes full of declassified documents, NASA stories, and videos that are just out of this world. Get it? So stay subscribed and stay scared, and I'll see you there. Number 4, the Guy Hoddle memo. So it's a pretty much an open book secret that the 3-letter agencies have known about aliens in some way or another since they've started writing things down. They don't hide it or pretend to hide it anymore, which is nice. They finally admitted that Area 51 even exists for the first time a couple years ago, so we could all use a little openness in our day-to-day. Let's take a look at one of the FBI's most talked about and most viewed documents, the Guy Hoddle memo. And despite being one of the most seen FBI memos, it's but a single-page document that was never followed up on. Well, it sounds like we should follow up on it. Guy Hoddle was the head of the FBI field office in Washington, and his report was addressed to the head of the FBI, one J. Edgar Hoover. The contents of the report were simple, but shocking. It detailed the descriptive encounter of an agent making a physical sighting of what they believed to be a UFO. It's dated 3 years after the Roswell incident, but it was reported in New Mexico for what it's worth. Here's a quote from the memo. The saucers were described as being circular in shape with raised centers, approximately 50 feet in diameter. Each one was occupied by 3 bodies of human shape but only 3 feet tall, dressed in metallic cloth of a very fine texture. Each body was bandaged in a manner similar to blackout suits used by speed flyers and test pilots. Now if you ask me, that is almost too perfect, isn't it? I mean, the memo lines up nearly perfectly with the stereotypical cartoon description of aliens being little gray or green men flying around in flying saucers around New Mexico. The memo goes on to read that the agent claims they had found the saucers because an FBI high-powered radar in the area had detected it, and this radar detecting it had interfered with the controlling mechanism of the crafts. But despite all of this, which really seems like it's the paper trail screaming, proving, hey, aliens are out there, you should go check them out, the memo ends by saying no further evaluation was attempted, and the Hoddle memo was never followed up on, presumably crumpled up and thrown away. Director Hoover, I guess, thought it wasn't worth his time and disregarded it, leaving it now as nothing more than an incredibly odd piece of history. Number 3, Project Blue Book. Well, here's the thing. Even if Director Hoover at the FBI didn't see fit to look into the Hoddle memo, there were definitely other organizations that were looking into UFOs. Maybe it's not just the FBI, but I can tell you that the Air Force sure was. If you're an experienced UFO enthusiast, perhaps you're already very familiar with Project Blue Book, but if you're not, hey, let's talk about it. The project was officially started in 1952 and terminated in 1969. And the project had 2 main goals. 1. Confirm if UFOs were a threat to national security. And 2. Scientifically analyze any UFO-related data. Well, that seems like pretty strong evidence to me. Not that the project existed to see if UFOs are real, but rather to determine if they were a threat. That seems like they're writing and admitting no, we know, we just want to know if they're scary. And is that not the most human sentiment you've ever heard? If you guys learned nothing from Avatar, we gotta be making friends with aliens, not being afraid of them. In the years of Project Blue Book's operations, a stunning 12,618 reports were filed and collected. And those are just the ones that are officially recorded. Of those, interestingly, there were an individual 700 reports that were found to be unexplainable after research and intense analysis. Isn't that interesting? Now, a great number of these reports turned out to be the U-2 spy plane that we mentioned all the way back in point number 5, if you remember that far away. But that still leaves 700 completely unexplained sightings of aircraft that the USAF looked into and could not find answers for. The project was ultimately shut down in 1969, with the official explanation being given that, number 1, no UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by the Air Force has ever given any indication of threat to our national security. And number 2, there has been no evidence submitted to or discovered by the Air Force that sightings categorized as unidentified represent technological developments or principles beyond the range of present-day scientific knowledge. And number 3, there has been no evidence indicating the sightings categorized as unidentified are extraterrestrial vehicles. Oh, well that sounds like kind of a bit of a bummer, doesn't it? They went through thousands of documents and declared that none of it was worthwhile evidence to suggest that aliens exist. Well, it's a shame that we're never going to mention any more things of the Air Force on this video, or any more things about pilots encountering aliens. I mean, that really blows. I mean, except for our next point. Take a listen. Number 2, the UAP report. Very Very recently, the Pentagon declassified a series of documents known internally as the UAP report, and it was basically the sequel to Project Blue Book, the streaming follow-up. And yeah, every single time we have an alien video, I'm probably going to have a little meltdown where I talk about how last year the government confirmed that they researched UFOs and that's what they spend your money on, and no one seemed to care about this, they just slipped it under the rug. I guess we were kind of busy with other stuff, but still, what happened to our curious minds, people? We learned that the various three-letter agencies in the States had been researching, analyzing, and scouting out sightings of UFOs, mostly because pilots just could not stop reporting them during training ops. One pilot, Lieutenant Ryan Graves, claims that he saw hundreds, maybe thousands in his career as a Navy pilot. One of the more famous ones is the Tic Tac sighting, referring to a massive oval-shaped aircraft that was spotted by two pilots. This one comes from 2004, and the two veteran pilots, Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate, were the ones who called it in. Two respected, trustworthy Navy veterans. Their report reads that the objects were spotted almost out of nowhere, some 80,000 feet in the air, which would then descend rapidly towards the Pacific Ocean, then stop at around 2,000 feet and hover in place. Very normal airplane behavior. They would drop out of radar range or shoot directly up into the sky on a 90-degree angle. For weeks, Navy crew was watching these objects trying to determine just what they were. They certainly weren't American in origin, and they weren't recognized by any other organizations. To confirm what they'd seen, Slate and Fravor were sent off on a reconnaissance mission to get eyes on it. What they found was more confusing than either of the two men could ever have imagined. They reported back that the object they were seeing was like a giant Tic Tac, white-colored, oval-shaped, and 40 feet long. Far too big to be a drone, and it didn't maneuver in a way like an aircraft would, making erratic movements, staying out of reach of radars, as if it knew it was trying to stay undetected. The pilots flew towards a rendezvous point to touch down and presumably cracked their windows open and asked each other, hey, what the hell was that? But as they flew towards the LZ, the UAP flew past them at a breakneck speed and then disappeared entirely. When questioned about it, Fravor said that it was unlike any aircraft he had ever seen in his life. I mean, that guy flew planes like every day for years, so he probably knows a thing or two. Number 1, non-terrestrial officers. Now, if you're like me, you're probably frustrated that you know the truth is so close within grasp behind closed doors. To know in your heart of hearts that there are answers to the unexplained just out of sight would drive you to do something crazy. Now, for most of us, all we can do is sit and speculate and maybe watch some lovely top 5 videos of a very handsome host talking about aliens. But for one Gary McKinnon, a Scottish computer programmer, he decided that wasn't enough and decided to take matters into his own hands. McKinnon was a genius computer hacker and had his sights set on the biggest prize he could imagine, going after NASA's servers to see if they had any hidden alien data just waiting to be found, in what was described as the biggest military hack of all time. Quite the conversation starter. Why would anyone risk their career, freedom, and livelihood on this? Well, Gary wanted the truth and he would do anything to get it. McKinnon claims he had insider knowledge that confirmed the US had suppressed anti-gravity technology reverse engineered from UFOs and free energy. In his own statement, McKinnon said, "This should not be kept hidden from the public when pensioners can't even pay their fuel bills." Yeah. Well, so what did McKinnon find? Well, he didn't find proof of the reverse-engineered UFOs that he'd been hoping for, but he found quite a lot that was remarkably illuminating. First up, a 400-page document called the Disclosure Project, outlining testimonials from government agents across multiple branches of service, reporting all their sightings and scientific analysis on unexplained flying objects. That would already be pretty impressive, but on top of that, McKinnon also managed to find a document entitled Non-Terrestrial Officers. Non-Terrestrial Officers? What? What? Is that just fancy talk for astronaut? Well, the document was a spreadsheet listing the names of NASA officers and employees who were to be transferred to new ships or to serve on board space stations. But here's where it gets weird. McKinnon noted that the names of these vessels listed did not appear to exist in any other database. And if that wasn't enough, McKinnon claims in his searching he saw images of aircraft that did not resemble anything he had ever seen. One in particular he describes as looking like a massive cigar-shaped craft floating over the northern hemisphere that did not look man-made. One wonders if that's the same as the Tic Tac ship. He said he was in a shock looking at the image and didn't think to take a photo. Now, after pulling off an unbelievable fast one on NASA, McKinnon couldn't resist a bit of cheeky cyber vandalism and edited NASA's website homepage with a bit of text that read, "Your security is crap, by the way." Now, I'm not endorsing hacking a government website, but that's one of the coolest things I've ever read. Now, I don't know how much you know know about the United States government, boy do they just love it when you prove to them that they have a massive security breach in their most classified data. Presumably the only thing that kept McKinnon from being strapped to a car battery and thrown into a black van by the men in black was the fact that he lived in Scotland and was kind of hard to get a hold of. He was arrested by UK police, and the United States government tried their absolute hardest to have him extradited to the States to be tried for the fullest extent of his crimes. Honestly, I bet it was the note. I bet that's what really pushed them over the edge. McKinnon managed to avoid extradition and was protected by the Crown for serving out what would have been a 70-year sentence. But presumably he's not planning any road trips to the States anytime soon.
Starting off, we have the original Roswell sighting. One simply cannot discuss aliens, UFOs, or anything supernatural without mentioning that fateful summer of 1947. Rancher W.W. Mack Brazel had found wreckage on his property in Lincoln County, New Mexico, roughly 120 kilometers north of Roswell, sometime between mid-June and early July, describing it as rubber strips, tinfoil, and thick paper. The ranch had no phone and no radio, leaving Matt completely unaware of the ongoing flying saucer craze, so he gathered the debris and just pushed it under some brush to dispose of it. This was not the first instance of a flying disc spotting in the region, with several stories already being reported to the press that year. On July 5th, Mack drove into Corona, where he heard stories of silvery flying discs, and 2 days later, on July 7th, made the decision to bring the wreckage into the sheriff's office in Roswell. The sheriff called in the Roswell Army Airfield, which assigned the matter to Major Jesse Marcel. Mack brought Major Marcel back to the debris site, and the two gathered up more pieces of rubber and tinfoil, with the Major taking the materials home. On July 8th, Public Information Officer for the Roswell Army, Walter Hott, issued a press release stating that personnel from the field's 509th Operations Group had recovered a flying disc near Roswell. On that same day, Major Marcel took the material to his base commander, Colonel William Blanchard, who reported the findings to General Roger Ramey at Fort Worth Army Airfield. FWAF for short. General Ramey ordered that the material be flown to Fort Worth immediately, leaving Marcel to board a B-29 Superfortress to make the flight. As soon as Marcel brought the material to General Ramey's office, both Ramey and his chief of staff, Colonel Thomas Dubose, identified the material as pieces of a weather balloon kite. The weather officer on duty explained to reporters that ray wind devices were used at around 80 weather stations across the country. The balloons were attached to a 6-pointed reflective device that looked like a silver star. After launch, the balloon would expand with increasing altitude before bursting at around 60,000 feet, with pieces dispersing in their fall to the ground. Now, after the initial newspaper reports of 1947, the Roswell incident faded from public attention for more than 30 years, until the late 1970s, which brings us to February of 1978, when UFO researcher Stanton Friedman interviewed Major Marcel, whose statements contradicted those he made to the press in 1947, saying they wanted some comments from him, but he wasn't at liberty to do that. All he could do was keep his mouth shut. And General Ramey is the one who told the newspapers, the newsman, what it was and to forget about it. It's nothing more than a weather observation balloon. Of course, they both knew differently. Now, while he didn't elaborate on that statement, and I wish he did deny the popular theories at the time of any bodies being found near the debris. After the United States congressional inquiries, the General Accounting Office launched an inquiry and directed the Office of United States Secretary of the Air Force to conduct an internal investigation. A report released in 1994 concluded that the material recovered in 1947 was likely, keyword here, debris from Project Mogul, a military surveillance program employing high-altitude balloons in classified portions of an unclassified New York University project by atmospheric researchers. A scholarly consensus emerged concluding that the military had decided to conceal the true purpose of the crash device, allegedly nuclear test monitoring, and instead inform the public that the crash was of a weather balloon. The balloon had allegedly been launched from Alamogordo, Army Airfield a month earlier, carrying a radar reflector and classified Project Mogul sensors for experimental monitoring of Soviet nuclear testing. The Air Force reports were dismissed by UFO experts as being either disinformation or simply implausible. Yeah. Now, the scary part about all of this for me is counting how many times the government has changed its tale, expecting the general public to believe them each time. Which story do you believe? In fourth place, we have an anonymous report from 2013 from Athens, Texas. A retired military firefighter and commercial pilot, who was also a former astronaut, submitted his account of what happened around 10:15 p.m. on the evening of July 5, 2013, to the National UFO Reporting Center, also known as NUFORC. He reported that he and his family were sitting outside, and when he looked up into the sky, he observed a fairly large orange glowing orb moving rapidly overhead at around 90 degrees of elevation. A minute or two later, his whole family spotted a group of 3 similar objects along the same flight path as the first one. The objects allegedly gave off no sound and seemed to glow from atmospheric heating. He and his family attempted to record the objects using their iPhones, although the grainy dark video was of no evidential use. A direct quote from him reads, "They moved much faster than orbital satellites, like the International Space Station, or airplanes, but much slower than meteors, and did not change brightness as a meteor would upon entering the atmosphere." So, if a former astronaut and pilot has no explanation for what he witnessed, what the heck was it? In the middle of our list today, we're discussing a San Antonio spotting of 7 donuts in the sky. On May 19th of 1952, an air crew flying an RB-36 reconnaissance aircraft reported spotting a series of, you guessed it, several donut shapes appearing in the sky, and were able to take photographs to accompany their incident report, which can be found in National Archives. The crew of 22 reported flying just north of Sonora when they originally spotted the phenomenon, stating that the plane was headed on a 301-degree heading at 18,000 feet, with relatively calm winds for that altitude. At 8:05 p.m., the objects appeared just to the left of the bomber's nose, at a range estimated by the crew to be around 80 to 120 kilometers ahead. The objects were stacked vertically from approximately 25,000 feet to 60,000 feet. And even with all the photographs and drawings, there is still no definite answer as to what was spotted. In second place, we have the Washington Flap. At 11:40 p.m. on Saturday, July 19th of 1952, Edward Nugent, an air traffic controller at the Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, try saying that 5 times fast, spotted 7 objects on his radar. The objects were around 24 kilometers south-southwest of the city, not following any established flight paths, and no known aircrafts were in that area. Edward's superior, Harry Barnes, a senior air traffic controller at that airport, watched the objects on the radarscope, later writing that they knew immediately that a very strange situation existed. Their movements were completely radical compared to those of any ordinary aircraft they knew of. Harry had 2 controllers check Edward's radar, and they found it was working pretty normally. He then called to National Airport's radar-equipped control tower, and the controllers there said that they had unidentified blips on their radar screen, and that a hovering bright light in the sky was moving at speeds they couldn't understand. Now at this point, other objects appeared in all sectors of the radar scope, and when they moved over the White House and the United States Capitol, Harry then called the Andrews Air Force Base, which was located around 10 miles away. Although they reported that they had no unusual objects on their radar, an airman soon called the base's control tower to report the sighting of a strange object. Airman William Brady, who was in the tower, saw an object that appeared to be an orange ball of fire, trailing a tail, saying it was unlike anything he had ever seen before. Now, where have I said that? Oh yeah. As William tried to alert the other personnel in the tower, the strange object took off at an unbelievable speed. On one of National Airport's runways, pilot S.C. Pierman was waiting in the cockpit of his plane for permission to take off. After spotting what he believed to be a meteor, he was told that the control tower's radar had detected unknown objects closing in on his position. Pierman observed 6 objects that he described as white, tailless, fast-moving lights over a 14-minute period. He was in radio contact with Harry during his sighting, and Harry later reported that each sighting coincided with a pip that could be seen near his plane. When he reported that the light streaked off at a high speed, it disappeared on their scope. Now meanwhile, back at the Andrews Air Force Base, Staff Sergeant Charles Davenport observed an orange-red light to the south, where the light would appear to stand still, then make an abrupt change in direction and altitude, with the phenomena happening over several times. At one point, both radar centers at National Airport and the radar at Andrews Air Force Base were tracking an object hovering over a radio beacon. The object vanished in all 3 radar centers at the same time. At 3 a.m., shortly before 2 United States Air Force F-94 Starfire jet fighters, I'm really ancient on my airplanes today, from Newcastle Air Force Base in Delaware arrived over Washington. All of the objects vanished from the radar at National Airport. However, when the jets ran low on fuel and left, the objects returned, which convinced Harry that the UFOs were monitoring radio traffic and behaving accordingly. Now, the objects were last detected by radar at 5:30 a.m. The government later tried dismissing the events of that day on a temperature blip, but those who were present have been adamant otherwise. In first place, we have the abduction of Betty and Barney Hill. Yeah, I know I said I'd be talking about UFO sightings today, but this event is a combination sighting and abduction that I couldn't leave off the list. The Hills were a married couple that lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Barney was employed by the United States Postal Service, while Betty was a social worker. They were active in the local Unitarian congregation, members of the NAACP, and Barney sat on a local board of the United States Commission on Civil Rights. Overall, they seem like pretty normal folks, right? The UFO sighting happened at around 10:30 p.m. on September 19th of 1961. The Hills were driving back to their home in Portsmouth from a vacation in Niagara Falls in Montreal. Just south of Lancaster, New Hampshire, Betty noticed a bright point of light in the sky that moved from below the moon and the planet Jupiter upwards to the west of the moon. While Barney was driving, Betty reasoned that she was observing a falling star. Only, it was moving upwards. Because it moved erratically and grew bigger and brighter, Betty convinced Barney to stop their car for a closer look, as well as to walk their dog, Delcy. Barney obliged and stopped at a picnic area just south of Twin Mountain. Now by this point, Betty had dug out her binoculars for a closer look and described seeing an odd-shaped aircraft flashing multicolored lights travel across the face of the moon, believing it to be a flying saucer based off of stories she had heard from her sister. Now taking his turn with the binoculars, Barney thought it was just a commercial plane at first, but soon changed his mind because without looking as if it had turned, the craft rapidly descended in his direction, causing him to realize something was wrong. The Hills said they continued driving on the isolated road, moving very slowly towards Franconia Notch in order to observe the object as it came even closer. At one point, the object passed above a restaurant and signal tower on top of Cannon Mountain and came out near the Old Man of the Mountain. Betty testified that it was at least 1.5 times the length of the granite cliff profile, which was 40 feet long and it seemed to be rotating. At one point, the object descended rapidly towards their vehicle, causing Barney to stop in the middle of the highway. The huge silent craft hovered at around 80 to 100 feet above the Hills' 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air and filled the entire field of view in the windshield. Barry stepped away from the vehicle and moved closer to the object, which he later said was roughly the size of a huge pancake. And that statement right there just made me hungry. Still using the binoculars, Barney claimed to have seen 8 to 11 humanoid figures peering out of the craft's windows, seeming to look right at him. In his report to investigator Walter Webb of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, NICAP, Barney described specifically that the beings were somehow not human, but humanoid. In unison, all but one figure moved to what appeared to be a panel on the rear wall of the hallway that encircled the front portion of the craft. The one remaining figure continued to look at Barney and communicated a message to him, saying, "Stay where you are and keep looking." Barney had a recollection of observing the humanoid forms wearing glossy black uniforms and black caps. Red lights on what appeared to be bat wing fins began to telescope out of the sides of the craft, and a long structure descended from the bottom of the aircraft. Now, the silent aircraft approached what Barney estimated was within 50 to 80 feet overhead and 300 feet away from him. Not arriving home until dawn, the Hills stated that they had some odd sensations and impulses they couldn't explain. Now, extremely confused, the Hills said they tried to reconstruct what had exactly happened the night before, but their memories were incomplete and fragmented. Notice I did a little bit of a jump there. That's because we don't know what happened. After sleeping for a few hours, Betty awoke and placed the shoes and clothing she had worn during the drive into her closet, observing that the dress was torn at the hem, zipper, lining, and later noted a pinkish powder on her dress. Now, over the years, 5 different laboratories have conducted chemical and forensic analyses on the dress. This wasn't the only damaged items in their possession. Barney said that the leather strap for the binoculars was torn, but didn't remember how. The toes of his best dress shoes were scraped, and their watches were broken, and no matter what, never worked again. There were shiny concentric circles, so similar to the rings that you would find on a tree trunk on their car's trunk, that had not been there the previous day. Betty and Barney experimented with a compass, noting that when they moved it close to the spots, the needle would whirl rapidly. But when they moved it a few inches away from the shiny spots, it would drop down. 10 days after the UFO encounter, Betty began having a series of vivid dreams, which continued for 5 successive nights. She stated that she experienced them with a degree of detail and intensity that she never had before. And after the 5th night, they stopped and never recurred, although they occupied her thoughts during the day. Determined to recover their lost memories, the Hills opted to partake in hypnosis sessions. Barney recalled driving the car away from the UFO, but afterwards he felt compelled to pull off the road and drive into the woods, eventually spotting 6 men standing on the dirt road. The car stalled, and 3 of the men approached the car, telling Barney not to fear them. He was still anxious, however, and he reported that their leader told him to close his eyes. While hypnotized, Barney said, "I felt like the eyes had pushed into my eyes," a statement he would repeat each session. The best anyone has been able to rebut what happened was claiming stress and sleep deprivation as the cause of what they saw and experienced. I'll admit, I'm usually much more of a skeptic, but This seems pretty dang real to me.
I'm just gonna call this first sighting or series of sightings February 2023. February was quite a month for unidentified flying objects, and I wanted to start this list off with these sightings because of how recent they are. They may not be as definitive or weird as some of the other sightings on this list, but these were pretty high profile stories, and it's always far more interesting when the government is involved in these things. Just adds another layer of credibility to it. Not that the government doesn't lie or withhold information about things, I think we all know that that happens, but the fact that it's being reported on so heavily means it's pretty big news. So the story here is that several mysterious high altitude objects were shot down in February of 2023 over various airspaces. We had objects being spotted in Canada, United States, Latin America, China, Eastern Europe. It started when several unidentified objects were shot down over Alaska, the Yukon, and Lake Huron. The general of NORAD, Glenn D. Van Herk, made a statement saying the objects could be benign, but it wasn't 100% sure. When asked if they could be of alien origin, though, that's the question we're all digging to ask, he said he just wasn't ruling anything out. I'm just interested by this. It really seems like the government and military agencies are starting to become more open to the idea of extraterrestrial life, or maybe some of them already are fully aware of their presence. Either way, though, it seems like it's being discussed more. It's not being written off as nonsense like it has been in the past. So just that aspect alone is interesting to me. Now, here's another interesting thing about these cases. There were recovery attempts made, to find these objects that had plummeted towards the Earth. Unfortunately, they all landed in areas that aren't all that accessible, so it made for a pretty difficult recovery process, and the missions were pretty soon abandoned. Now, that's what they say, but what if the government actually did recover something that they just aren't ready or even willing to show us? Could be the case. You never know. Next up, we have the Oumuamua. Oumuamua, that's a hard word to say. I'm gonna try not to say it too many times on here. Old news with this one, right? It's that weird cylindrical object that was spotted flying through space. It's definitely been talked about plenty of times, including on this channel, I'm sure, but it's a recent article dated March 7th of this year that I'm referring to here. So, like I said before, I think when the government, military, or academics get involved with UFO type stories, it just makes it far more interesting to me. Not that I'd totally disregard some farmer in Ohio saying he was probed by a little gray, bug-eyed alien, but I don't know, people like attention sometimes. And a recent article written by Sean Kirkpatrick, head of the Pentagon's AARO, or All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which specializes in unidentified flying objects, and a Harvard professor named Avi Loeb, they discussed the possibility that objects such as Oumuamua, spotted back in 2017, could be of alien origin. So pretty exciting. I mean, these are two learned, intelligent people writing an official document theorizing the possibility of alien life. I mean, that's just cool. The article does say, however, that the objects, like the Oumuamua, could be, quote, a parent craft that releases many small probes during its close passage to Earth. So probes observing Earth could be good or bad or neutral, depending on whether you're a glass half empty or half full type person. Now, they didn't just discuss that object, they were looking at a variety of unidentified objects or probes, and they wanted to speculate that these crafts could potentially power their batteries from starlights, and that maybe Earth's water could be fuel. It's pretty wild stuff, and yes, a lot of it is speculative, but the fact that a highly respected scientist that's spent 20 years studying physics is proposing these ideas, pretty fascinating. Something I also want to mention about people who are just very skeptical about aliens even showing any interest at all in Earth. You'll hear them say stuff like, well, extraterrestrial beings with all this advanced technology, they just wouldn't be interested in anything we're doing. It'd be like, God observing ants or something. And who's to say, first of all, that God doesn't like observing ants? And, even if that is the case, I mean, like, how can you really know that for sure? How on earth could we possibly know what beings from another planet are interested in? We don't know what kind of hobbies they have. It's also kind of counters their other argument, because it's like, yeah, spacefaring extraterrestrials would be leagues ahead of us in terms of intelligence, but I know what they're thinking. I know what they like. Just doesn't make any sense. The Texas Zoo creature. So we take a look at a lot of UFOs on this channel, so I thought I'd change it up a bit and take a look at a bizarre looking creature instead. This picture was taken just 1 year ago, back in May of 2022. It was taken by a security camera at a zoo in Amarillo, Texas at around 1:30 a.m. A bizarre figure was spotted on a security camera, and before you say it's just a lion on its hind legs, which would also be pretty freaky, mind you, this figure was outside of the zoo, so it's not one of the animals unless one of them escaped. Now, why am I putting this on an alien list? A lot of people think it looks like a werewolf or Sonic the Hedgehog or something, but I don't know. To me, it looks pretty alien. Look at the elongated back part of the head. It almost looks like a xenomorph from Alien or something. Plus, I find the presence of alien life to be far, far more likely than werewolves or other kinds of fantasy-based creatures like that. I mean, like, who knows, but there's a lot of unexplored space out there and a lot of explored space here on Earth. I think we'd have spotted a werewolf by now if they existed. There's also a big chance that this could just be a trick of the camera. Security footage can be kinda janky sometimes, or perhaps we have a zoo prankster on our hands, or maybe this is a super deformed person. If that's the case, I hope they're okay. Regardless though, this is an odd figure to see in the middle of the night outside of a Texas zoo. And trust me, I know my Texas zoos. The Wales UFO. I didn't know this, but it turns out there are a lot of UFO sightings in Wales. I don't know what aliens' fascination is with Wales, but reports date all the way back to the 1940s. Actually, all the way back to the 12th century, but I don't know if I give much credence to stuff dating back that far. Apparently, religious pilgrims believed to have seen a fire-breathing dragon erupt from the sea and fly into the sky. Could have been a UFO and they just didn't know what to make of it and just called it a dragon, but anyway, way off topic. The UFO in question here was spotted back in September of 2016 by a police helicopter at around 9 p.m. It was only visible on the chopper's thermal camera and seemed to be moving at a speed of 106 miles per hour over the Bristol Channel. Full video of the footage was released by a former cop, Gary Hasseltine, who has been urging the UK government to come forward and reveal what they know about UFOs. What's also interesting about this one is that the object was moving against the wind, so it is or was being operated one way or another. It's not like it was some object caught up in a wind current or something. Police also stated years after the event that it could have possibly been a drone, but they were struggling to keep up with it, so it'd have to be a pretty fast one. There are drones that reach that 100-mile-per-hour speed, but they're pretty high-end. Your common drones clock in at around 45 to 70 miles per hour, so again, who knows, but it's possible. And coming in at our number one spot, we have aliens in Bolivia. I wanted to finish off with this one because we have reports of both your typical UFO sighting and reports of actual aliens being spotted here, so we're getting some real bang for your buck with this one. The story just happened back in March of this year, and it all started when residents of a small village in the La Paz area of Bolivia claimed to have spotted a mysterious green light in the sky. A bunch of people pulled out their phones and started filming. They were in absolute awe and said it looked to be some kind of alien spacecraft. And then 2 days later, little people were spotted running around the town at night. One villager named Rita Marquez reported to news outlets describing the creatures as little, almost like goblins, and is quoted saying they were miniature beings, like those little people who appear to children. And it felt like something creepy was happening, like they were welcoming their friends, you know? Now, I'm not sure exactly what she means by that, but it's definitely odd. This bizarre situation all culminated with several residents claiming to have found one of the small creatures curled up dead in a gutter one morning, the body of which soon vanished. So we clearly have a lot going on here. Weird lights in the sky, possibly even an aircraft spotted, little beings running around the streets at night, a dead one, unfortunately. It's all pretty weird, and sure, it's possible it's just a hoax or even maybe mass hysteria, but there's also a good chance that it isn't. I love stories like this where there are multiple witnesses. Again, it adds another layer of credibility to the whole thing, because obviously it's a lot harder to organize a hoax and get multiple people involved. people talk, they let secrets out. Another interesting thing about this one is that authorities did get involved and told the villagers to kind of stay hushed about the whole incident, so maybe they just thought everyone was nuts and didn't want to spread misinformation, but perhaps there is something going on here that they need to cover up for one reason or another. Either way though, something happened. Are they among us?
Starting off this list in our number 5 spot, we have Project Grudge Report 13. Okay, so I've read quite a few different UFO sighting stories and stories of alleged alien abductions, and this is fully one of the most terrifying that I have ever heard of. So basically, the story starts off in March of 1956 when Air Force Sergeant Jonathan P. Lovett was assisting Major William Cunningham in the White Sands Missile Testing Grounds near Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. The pair were out searching for debris from a recent rocket test when Major Cunningham heard a loud scream. His first thought was that Sergeant Lovett had been bitten by a snake, so he went around to help aid his partner when he allegedly saw something he never expected. He recounted seeing the sergeant being dragged away by some sort of long serpentine arm that had wrapped around his legs. Whatever this creature was, it was connected to a hovering silver disc that was in the air about 15 feet away. The major stood there in horror as he watched this creature and the sergeant retreat into the craft, which then rose vertically into the sky. Of course, he radioed for help, and while he was taken to the hospital for observation, search teams were sent out immediately. It wouldn't happen until 3 days later that they would find the body of Sergeant Lovett, only 10 miles from the site where he was said to have disappeared from. The autopsy performed on him later also only raised more questions than answers, as his body was severely harmed. So of course there was an investigation that happened, and many people claim this investigation was detailed in a 600-page document labeled Project Grudge Report 13. But the problem with this is that no official information on Report 13 exists, and the US government denies its very existence. Though Grudge Reports 1 through 12 have been declassified, along with Report 14, no official mention or accounting of Report 13 exists, and the story solely relies on secondhand accounts of the horrible incident. In our number 4 spot today, we have the cigar-shaped UFO. Okay, so let's set the stage. It's 2:45 a.m. on July 24th, 1948, and there are 20 passengers aboard a twin-engine propeller plane that is at 5,000 feet, being flown from Houston to Atlanta by pilot Clarence S. Childs and co-pilot John B. Whitted. Out of the 20 passengers on board, 19 of them are asleep at these early morning hours, and everything seems to be going as per usual until it wasn't. The 2 pilots and the 1 passenger who was awake all witnessed the same thing about 20 miles southeast of Montgomery, Alabama. About a week after the incident, the pilot explained what he had seen by saying, quote, "It was clear there were no wings present, that it was powered by some jet or other type of power shooting flame from the rear some 50 feet. There were 2 rows of windows which indicated an upper and a lower deck, and from inside these windows a very bright light was glowing. Underneath the ship there was a blue glow of light. By his estimates, he watched the UFO for about 10 seconds before it completely vanished." The co-pilot gave a similar explanation and also added, quote, "The object was cigar-shaped and seemed to be about 100 feet in length. The fuselage appeared to be about 3 times the circumference of a B-29 fuselage. It had 2 rows of windows, an upper and a lower. The windows were very large and seemed square. They were white with light, which seemed to be caused by some type of combustion. I asked Captain Childs what we had just seen, and he said that he didn't know." Well, this is obviously all very strange and peculiar. What has driven UFO enthusiasts even more is the fact that this strange sighting was of course later investigated by the US government, but the results of that investigation have allegedly been mostly destroyed. Does that mean that they found something they aren't willing to share yet? Some believe that perhaps the pilots and the passenger witnessed a secret Soviet spy craft, while others believe it was definitely something of the extraterrestrial variety. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Lubbock incident. On August 25th, 1951 in Lubbock, Texas, a group of scientists from the Texas Technical College were all hanging out in the backyard of geology professor Dr. W.I. Robinson. They were all just chilling, enjoying each other's company, until around 9:20 p.m. when they saw something very strange. It was a V-shaped formation of 15 15 to 30 bluish-green lights passing overhead. They were completely confused over what it could be, but figured that the lights would likely reappear, which they did. About an hour later, the lights reappeared, and at this point, all of these scientists knew that they had witnessed something exceptionally interesting, but what was it? The scientists weren't the only ones to witness the lights either. About 350 miles away in Albuquerque, New Mexico, an employee of the Atomic Energy Commission's top secret Sandia Corporation, who had a high-level Q security clearance, had been sitting outside with his wife, quote, gazing at the night sky, commenting on how beautiful it was, when both of them were startled at the sight of a huge airplane flying swiftly and silently over their home. On the aft edge of the wings, there were 6 to 8 pairs of soft, glowing bluish lights. There were more sightings as well, all reporting a similar thing. The group of scientists began investigating, tracking the lights, which they witnessed 12 more times. They measured the angle of the lights, they tracked the speed, and they attempted, unsuccessfully, to try and measure the UFO's altitude. Here's the deal with this though. The government did end up investigating, but the official explanation for these lights is the most cryptic message I've ever seen. It read, quote, I thought that the professor's lights might have been some kind of birds reflecting the light from mercury vapor streetlights, but I was wrong. They weren't birds. They weren't refracted light, but they weren't spaceships. The lights that the professor saw have been positively identified as a very commonplace and easily explainable natural phenomena. I can't divulge exactly the way the answer was found because it is an interesting story of how a scientist set up complete instrumentation to track down the lights. Telling the story would lead to his identity, and in exchange for his story, I promised the man complete anonymity. Despite people claiming that the mystery has been solved, by this explanation, people are left with a lot more questions than answers. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Shag Harbor incident. This UFO encounter is often referred to as Canada's Roswell, so I was shocked that I hadn't heard of it before. Basically, this incident took place on October 4th, 1967, when an unknown object crashed into the water near Shag Harbor, which is a tiny town in Nova Scotia. There were at least 11 people who witnessed this object as it crashed, and many people claimed to have heard a whistling sound followed by a loud bang when the crash took place. The witnesses that claimed to have seen the UFO were all doing a bunch of different things at the time. One couple was just sitting on their porch, but the 2 witnesses that really get me are a flight pilot and a ship captain. On Air Canada Flight 305, First Officer Robert Ralph pointed out to Captain Pierre Charbonneau that there was something strange at the left side of the aircraft. They reported an object tracking along on a parallel course a few miles away and described it as a brilliantly lit rectangular object with a string of smaller lights trailing the object. Shortly after they first noticed it, there was a large but silent explosion near the unknown object, and then 2 minutes later there was a second explosion, but this one faded to a blue cloud. As for the ship captain, Captain Leo Howard Mercy, he saw 4 blips on his Decca radar that were totally stationary. This led to him looking up to the sky, and that is when he saw 4 bright objects sitting in a rectangular formation about 28 kilometers from the vessel's window. He wasn't the only one who saw it on board. The entire crew of nearly 20 fishermen stood on deck and watched. A man named Laurie Wickens was another one of the witnesses, and he and some of his friends ended up calling the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, because they saw a huge object floating in the Atlantic Ocean about 1,000 feet off of the shore. This is all super weird, and not only the RCMP, but also the Royal Canadian Navy and the Royal Canadian Air Force became involved in investigation, but nothing was ever recovered or found. But it was also revealed that all commercial, private, and military aircrafts along the eastern seaboard were accounted for, so what could have all these witnesses seen? Since they have never officially identified what it was in the official Government of Canada documents, it is listed as a UFO. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the Westall incident. Taking it back to 1966, we have the largest mass UFO sighting in Australia that at the time was largely ignored. This incident took place when over 300 students and staff members of a school in Melbourne all witnessed multiple UFOs silently flying through the air before they landed in a nearby field. Well, there's been a ton of speculation about this incident in the many years it's been. One witness account stands out among the rest, and that is the account made by the science teacher from the school, Andrew Greenwood. He was alerted to the UFO event by a hysterical student, and when he went outside to see for himself, everything changed. Previously a skeptic of UFO stories, Andrew's mind was abruptly changed when he saw, as he described it, a round silver object object about the size of a car with a metal rod sticking up in the air. He went on to explain that suddenly 5 planes came and surrounded the object, all while more people were gathering to watch. He called what happened next the most amazing flying he has ever seen, explaining that, quote, every time they got too close to the object it would slowly accelerate, then rapidly accelerate, and then move away from them and stop. Then they would take off after it again, and the same thing would happen. This went on for about 20 minutes before the mysterious object just vanished. As weird as this all was, what was almost weirder was what happened next. Firstly, the headmaster of the school is said to have tried to put a stop to anyone talking about the incident at all, threatening severe punishment to any student or staff who was caught speaking about it, and when the Royal Australian Air Force contacted him, he refused to talk to them at all about it. There have also been stories of witnesses getting visits from people warning them not to speak of the incident. Andrew explained, quote, when he asked the physical education teacher to describe what she had seen herself so that he could compare it with his own observation, she just wouldn't say anything. Another witness who did talk to Andrew and described what she had seen in great detail, just 30 minutes later refused to speak to him and wouldn't say a word. Was this because of the threats from the headmaster, or was something else going on here? This is definitely one strange UFO story that leaves behind a lot of questions.
Number 5. Red Eyeball Ship. In January of this year, a man in Spokane, Washington was in his living room when he happened to sight a strange alien craft that caused him to question his beliefs and his place in the universe. In his own words, our backyard camera recorded this strange object. We put a camera in our backyard because stuff has been coming up missing. But one morning I had the TV on in my living room as I was sitting on our couch. I happened to look up at the TV and saw this strange object. I went out on the back porch and I couldn't see that object at all. But when I went back in the house, it was still there. I went to get my brother to show him what I was seeing. He didn't know what it was, but he was seeing it too. Then it started to move out in the field, where I didn't see it anymore. Then it started to come back towards my backyard. Again, it looks round with a red eyeball in the middle, but I have no clue to this day what it is. I took a couple photos in infrared. If you look in the center of the red, you can see something. Looking at the photos, it is difficult to come up with another explanation for what this strange unidentified flying object could be. Number 4. An American UFO. Our next tale was posted this year, but details an experience from the year 1980. The witness shared his story of seeing a UFO that seemed to be affiliated with the US government, but he also posits a theory about why the government would allow this ship to be seen by the public. I had a sighting in broad daylight in 1980 at around 9 a.m. in early December. My mom and hundreds of other motorists witnessed it as well. We were driving to visit my father at his work in Beverly Hills and were waiting to hop on the freeway in Santa Monica when we saw your classic silver disc. It hovered completely still at about 150 feet or so for 10 solid minutes. Remember, we were crawling, slow as molasses traffic. We got a very good look at this thing. On the underside was stenciled US Air Force. It looked very official, and we assumed it had to be one of ours. Then, after hovering for 10 minutes, it shot off towards the southwest like a bullet. I've never seen anything move so fast in my life. It was shocking, but I have a theory as to what the craft was doing there and why we witnessed it. I don't know how familiar you are with Jimmy Carter on the issue of UFOs, but he is on record as having had a sighting of his own in 1973. Carter was no flake. He had a degree in nuclear physics and is a former naval officer, retired at the rank of lieutenant, which in the Navy is like the Army equivalent of a major. Rank promotions are much harder and time-consuming in the Navy. Anyhow, Carter tried like hell to get disclosure during his presidency. He knew he was being stonewalled. When you think about it, it's unacceptable that the nation's most powerful elected leader cannot declassify something that the public, the world, has a right to know about. But what I've come to believe is that Carter ordered a captured or back-engineered UFO with official Air Force insignia to fly over a populated area, where thousands were waiting in traffic to get on the freeway, so people would ask the questions he couldn't find the answers to. Number 3. Father and son UFO bonding. Next, we have a story from Nova Scotia, where a young man saw an alien craft and panicked. He thought that no one would believe him until his father told him about his own close encounter from years before. Here is his story. My living room at the time had a window above me behind the TV. So, I am watching TV. I don't remember what exactly. It was about 2:30 or 3 a.m. at this point. My father got up to use the washroom and went back to bed. I got up to get a drink and saw something out of the corner of my eye, outside the window and above the high school. I literally could walk outside my house, take 2 steps, and I was on school property. I see this light above the school. I figured it was a meteor shower or space junk. I grabbed the binoculars. I looked out the window to see if I could see it. I couldn't really get a good look. It was too blurry through the window. So I went outside to have a look. It was not very bright in my small town. I look out towards the school. I see something I can only describe as a ball metal, almost like a flowing liquid metal. But to my eyes, seemed like it was taking the form of a sphere, condensing in on itself from time to time and rippling. As if the surface rippled like water, the light from it appeared that way. It was circular, bright, white, almost silvery. At times, it seemed that the light coming from it had faded, and I could see that it was a solid sphere, silver in appearance. I do not know how big it would be. A guess would be the size of a 2-seater passenger plane. It darted from above the school to the hospital in a blink of an eye. The distance was about 1/4 of a kilometer, but on a somewhat linear path. I had my eyes glued to it, and it blinked out of existence. It is the only way I can describe it. I could no longer see it. I scanned around the sky with the binoculars, then found it was above a church about a full kilometer away. Same strange ball rippling like metal. I was outside for, I believe, 25 to 30 minutes. Based on my coming back in between 3:30 a.m. and 4 a.m., my brain could not comprehend what I was seeing. I literally thought I was dreaming or experiencing some kind of hallucination. I felt as if what I was seeing was straight out of a movie or sci-fi book. It was like it was darting around our entire town at random intervals, going from one part to another within the blink of an eye. The distance it traveled from the school to the hospital to the church is in total 1.4 kilometers. I snapped, and for some reason started crying. I ran to my dad and woke him up. "It's a satellite," is what he said. My father enjoyed watching stuff on UFOs and personally believed the US government covered something up about Roswell, but I never really said too much. He told me to go to sleep. I was terrified, for whatever reason. I was so scared after it. I did not sleep for months unless one of my parents was awake while I fell asleep. I really struggled with whatever I experienced that night for a very long time. It was a horrific experience for me and hard to even talk about. I had extreme anxiety and depression from it. I was only a teenager, just barely. I found myself being paranoid. I did not want to be alone at all. Anywhere, in the daytime, I would make sure I always knew where someone was. I was never alone. I was so afraid, I started saying prayers. I spent the next 5 years looking at everything I could that was related to UFOs. The sensation I had from it. I felt a oneness kind of, but also so completely overwhelmed with fear. It felt as if my skin was trying to escape my body. My spine burned, and the entire time I was filled with thoughts of, this is amazing, and I'm going to die. I need to get in the house. All the hair on my body was standing up. I was sweating. When I got in the house, my shirt was nearly stuck to me in sweat. My father thought I went outside and got attacked and ran away. I was crying and rambling about some craft in the sky and how it was going to get me. My father told me he never saw anyone so absolutely terrified before, that I was nervous and would look out the windows at night to make sure I was okay. I've never been so afraid in my life of anything. My body was telling me I was going to die. My father didn't like me waking him so I could sleep. My mother, well, was not in the picture. My father's reaction is based off of a sighting he had in the 70s that some people in the town saw. He was ridiculed by people for talking about the craft he saw so close to the ground it looked like it was going to land in the blink of an eye. It darted off and was gone. He said it was circular in shape, like the classic UFO, glowed bright yellow, and had a low hum to it. He doesn't really like talking about it. Number 2. Another father-son tale. Next, we have a story from a man who was not a believer in alien life until one night his young son pointed out something in the night sky to him. In his own words, "I was in my home in Almond, Michigan. That time of year, it gets quite dark quite early. It must have been around 8 p.m. My son, who at the time was 12, came running into the house, saying there was a UFO right outside our house. Let me add, at this point, I was not one who believed in UFOs. I went outside and my son pointed south and upwards and said, 'Look.' The funny thing was, at first I didn't see anything. but I did notice it was unusually dark. Then I noticed a very dim light. I suddenly realized that the reason it was so dark was that there was a huge craft right over our driveway. It was at tree level and was moving north at a very slow pace, approximately a slow walking speed. There was a very distinct humming, exactly like a large transformer humming. There was a very dull light in the middle, and as it traveled down our driveway, I made out a row of windows around the craft. The windows looked very large. I remember walking down the driveway with my son. The next thing I remember is standing out in the field north of my house, still looking at the UFO, when suddenly it went from approximately 90 or 100 feet straight up in the sky to where it was a pinpoint of light. It just looked like another star. This happened in under a second. We continued to watch it for quite a while when it took off in a northwesterly direction, like a meteor, and was gone in a second. There are a lot of things I can describe if you are interested, but this is the basic part. I don't feel like I was abducted, but honestly, I do not remember how I got from my driveway and then into the field. Number 1. Bigfoot, Alien Hunter. Our final story is perhaps the most insane sounding story I've ever read. It began when a group of friends went to stay in a cabin in Missoula, Montana. At first, everything seemed normal until they looked to the sky after dinner on their first night, as one of the witnesses reported. Right there, hovering above the meadow at almost the level of the hills off in the distance, it appeared to be a triangular shape / sphere shaped like an arrowhead. It had a flashing red light at each point, and they flashed at the same time. Slowly, the craft started turning until it was pointing right in our direction. We all squealed with nervousness. We all convinced ourselves and each other that it was much too far away and that there was no way it could see us. Jason got up and turned the outside lights off. Then, the object turned off its lights. When Jason turned them back on, it did as well. They did this a few more times, with the craft always copying their actions. Then, with no warning, it just shot forward and then came to a dead stop over top of us, and when it stopped that quickly, it seemed that the momentum made the front end point downwards right at us. The group ran inside and hid, with one of them eventually working up the courage to look out the window, only to see yet another rare sight. Bigfoot. The witness kept quiet about this because, you know, one thing at a time, but that night heard bipedal footsteps on the roof of the cabin. The next morning, 2 of the friends went to the river to fish, and the others had coffee on the porch, but looked to the tree line and saw the drivers of the alien craft. I saw as clear as day what is commonly called a gray alien. Its big bulbous head was peeking out from behind a tree, and I saw its dark almond-shaped eyes and the tiny nose with 2 very small holes. I'm not sure if it felt me looking at it, but it slowly moved back behind the tree. At that point, the fishermen came running back, saying that they had crossed paths with Bigfoot again. 40 feet into the woods of mainly ponderosa pine, they saw the Bigfoot. It walked step by step with them, and then it looked over at them and realized they were watching it. That's when it started walking towards them. They started running, and they saw that it was walking as quickly as they ran. When they made it through the woods, they got to a clearing. They ran with everything they had. They said it was dark brown in color and maybe 7 feet tall. Its hair was bushy in spots. Most people go their entire lives without seeing aliens, Bigfoot, or UFOs, so the fact that this trip to the cabin resulted in a hat trick is pretty impressive. If this is true, why was Bigfoot so close to an alien craft? Is he perhaps an alien as well? Number 5. Alien Gate Crashers. Our first story comes from a man in Zimbabwe who was asleep one night when he woke up to see an alien craft that seemingly had no trouble passing through solid objects. This is his recollection of the event. My name is Johan Reitman, and I farm near Feathersdorp, 150 kilometers from Harar. I am 31 years old. On the 5th of February, I woke up from a bad dream just after midnight, when I heard a car go past. I got up and looked out of the bedroom window, which faces the front of the farm. I watched as 2 cars passed each other, a strange sight, as there are usually few vehicles to be seen, and none at night. One car pulled into my gate, and I thought immediately, oh no, those guys are coming to pinch my new engine on the borehole. I rubbed my eyes and face to make sure I wasn't still asleep. I looked at the car again. It was long and wide, and made a low humming sound. I could see lights at the back, a row of red lights, and a front light which shone high enough to illuminate the treetops. This car or object stopped at my gate for a good 30 seconds and then drove on as if the gate had been opened, and that was it. It was gone. I took my torch, my rifle, 4 farm workers, and my dogs and we went out to the gate. Despite the fact that it had just rained, there were no tire tracks or human tracks on the road. As we approached the gate, I could feel heat coming up from the surface of the road, a really oppressive heat radiating from the ground. Even my ears felt flushed with heat, and my workers and I were soaked with perspiration. It was about 12:30 by then, so when we found nothing further, we all went back home. It was only the following morning that it occurred to me that when we reached the gate, it was closed. This meant that the car had disappeared through a closed gate because they had been watching it when it disappeared, and the gate hadn't moved. The next day, I sent one of the farm workers to fetch some sheep who were lost in the bush, and on his way back, he said he saw an object straddling the road. By the time he reached the spot, it was gone, but strangely enough, the sheep would not walk over to the area where the object had been. Instead, they divided around it. Number 4, a UFO crash in Greece. Our next report comes from Georg and Pantelos, who interviewed the witnesses of a UFO crash in Megas Platanos in Greece. The following is quoted directly from his report. At 0300 hours that night, shepherds and some villagers observed a small group of 5 to 6 UFOs approaching the area from the north. One of them had an unstable flight and seemed to be having a problem. Strange lights came out of the UFO's fuselage, but without any noise. As an eyewitness, Shepherd Trantos Karatranos told me suddenly the treble UFO lost altitude and crashed to the ground at a distance of about 500 meters away from him. He didn't hear any noise, but a fire started burning the bushes. Trantos was very afraid to get closer and stayed in his position watching the phenomenon. The rest of the UFOs in this group stopped over the accident spot, and 2 of them landed near the destroyed UFO. In a few minutes, the fire in the bushes was terminated. For the rest of the night till dawn, there was an unusual traffic from the ground to the flying UFOs. Light spots went up and down, probably collecting the pieces of the destroyed UFO and any bodies of the crew. They finished the collection before sunrise, and after that, the rest of the UFOs took off and were lost in the sky. Meanwhile, all the villagers had been awakened and had seen the whole operation. Early in the morning, the villagers went out to the spot where all of this had occurred, and they saw on the ground a burned oval shape in the ground, with a cut pine tree in the center, and very small metallic pieces, and pieces of wires around the tree. Some of the people, like Aragus Alavantes, collected a number of these pieces. One strange thing was that at the edges of the burned oval, the fire stopped, like it had been cut by a knife. Some hours later, a team of Hellenic Air Force personnel came into the area and told the villagers that this was nothing serious. Maybe a Soviet satellite crashed or a plane. They took some pieces of the UFO too and left the area. Argyris sent a piece of the UFO to the Space Research Institute in Brussels. That's the story. If you think that we need more information, we can get more, because I have a very good relationship with the people in the village of Megas Plantos. You see, they don't like to talk a lot about this story, because they are afraid that someone will think they are crazy or something. Number 3, an unexpected police sighting. The next story on our list was related by a Lithuanian police chief, whose officers witnessed strange UFO activity that resulted in him having to make the press rounds to reassure the people of his country. As he put it, "I am chief of police in Vilnius, Lithuania. Recently, I had to appear on the radio to explain that 2 policemen who had reported seeing something extraordinary were known to me to be reliable witnesses and were of sound and honest mind. There has been considerable public anxiety about this matter, arising from what I consider to be media hysteria about their official report. Earlier this year, the entire police force was put on alert. The 2 officers stated that they had observed a round, shining object on the main route at around midnight, 10 kilometers from the capital city, near the village of Nemegis. The object was flashing bright light and hovered 20 to 30 meters above the ground. At the same time, you could hear a strange sound, like electricity crackling, they said. The 2 men approached the UFO after watching it for almost half an hour. When they were some 50 meters from it, the object started to move upwards and away from them into the air, then accelerated towards the town. At that point, an alert was put out, and van loads of Rapid Reaction Force police and tracker dogs arrived on the scene, but the UFO had disappeared. We conducted official tests on the area's ground composition, measuring the air's radiation, and took sound recordings. The grass in the area for 10 meters meters around where the UFO was reported to have been sighted was visibly flattened. Number 2. A Swedish abduction. Our next tale is from a Swedish man who was walking home one night when he suddenly saw a strange light that seemed to instantly transport him to his destination. The following is his story in his own words. Call me Anders. In early March, I left a local election celebration and decided to walk home, about 5 kilometers away. I had a few glasses but was still sober. It was a starry, moonlit night, and I decided to take a shortcut that led over a hill. As I was climbing, a bright light came from behind, which I thought was a fast car. I moved off the road onto the grass verge, and then I realized it was not a car. The light passed right over me, almost touching my head very quick. Then, I found myself immediately outside my home in Lindholmen, ringing the doorbell frantically. When my wife opened the door, she saw that I had a wound in my forehead and my cheek was burnt. The next day, I telephoned the National Defense and was interviewed in detail by 2 investigators. They told me there were other witnesses. A woman cyclist reported seeing a light at the same time I did, and a couple driving nearby saw what they thought was a new water tower with extremely bright lights shining out of its windows. Later, they realized there was no water tower at that spot. I still have a scar on my face to this day. Whenever I touch it, I feel a tingling sensation, and I experience a wonderful feeling of oneness, of unity with the earth itself. Number 1. A strange sighting in Uruguay. Our final tale of the day comes from a police chief in Uruguay who was out with friends when the sights he saw made him a believer. In his own words, I am Police Chief Miguel Costa, in charge of the force at Melo, Uruguay. On March 10th, I was driving with 2 friends, Armando and Maria Pasa, along a gravel road near Tacuarembó, when a huge oval disc loomed out of the early morning darkness. It was enormous and gleaming, with yellow and orange lights. I stopped the car and purely on impulse flashed the headlights. All of a sudden, the UFO appeared to hesitate and zigzag up and back, as if answering our call. When I started up again, it was following us. I again stopped the car and flashed my lights. Again, the UFO appeared to waver in reply. We drove on once more along the twisting road, and the UFO stayed with us, always about half a kilometer away. This went on for almost 50 kilometers. That's when the strangest thing of all occurred. We were all glued to the windows, watching as the disc suddenly shot towards the ground as if it was going to crash. It stopped 50 to 100 meters from the earth, and we could clearly see its round, dome-like shape with a large flat plate underneath. There was a slight ring of cloud around the dome. The top was reddish, but the bottom was a brilliant glowing white. Inexplicably, the new position of the UFO made us all uneasy, so we turned around and headed back to Tacuarembó, the nearest town. The blazing lights of the UFO remained at a constant distance behind us. I pulled in under some trees, hoping to evade it. We then observed a second disc traveling some distance behind the first. They never touched, but they seemed to be traveling together. They seemed to maneuver up and down until clouds started to form. Then they passed over the top of the clouds and lit them up like a halo. Then they faded, getting smaller and smaller until they disappeared at dawn. They had been with us for 90 minutes. We were all speechless, as we could not believe what we had witnessed. Number 5. The Brookings Report. In the year 1960, NASA's Committee on Long-Range Studies partnered with the Brookings Institution to create a report for the House Committee on Science and Astronautics titled Proposed Studies on the Implications of Peaceful Space Activities for Human Affairs. Not surprisingly, when talked about in general conversations between UFO and alien believers, it is referred to instead as the Brookings Report. Most of the report is not particularly interesting for the purposes of this list, with sections about the implications of a space-derived weather predicting system and the implications of technological byproducts. But there is a section of the report that has garnered much attention over the years about the implications of a discovery of extraterrestrial life. This section theorizes about how the public would react to the discovery of alien life and how it would affect society, and how the decision would have to be made on whether or not such a discovery would be made public. Some choice passages are as follows. Anthropological files contain many examples of societies, sure of their place in the universe, which have disintegrated when they have had to associate with previously unfamiliar societies, espousing different ideas and different ways of life. Others that survived such an experience usually did so by paying the price of changes in values and attitudes and behavior. Studies might help to provide programs for meeting and adjusting to the implications of such a discovery. Questions one might wish to answer by such studies would include: how might such information, under what circumstances, be presented to or withheld from the public for what ends? What might be the role of the discovering scientists and other decision makers regarding release of the fact of discovery? While it is important to note that the report does not state whether the government should or should not cover up the existence of alien life should it be discovered, it does state that this is a choice that would have to be made. This report was developed relatively early in the history of space exploration and was presented to policymakers. So, we do know that people in charge of government policy were presented with a document that floated the idea of hiding the discovery of alien life from the people of Earth. I don't think the writers of the report were trying to hide anything, but the fact that a report featuring a section on what courses of action should be taken if, hypothetically, alien life were discovered, was commissioned makes me wonder if this was actually just a way to get the answers they needed without revealing the true implications of the report to the writers. Number 4. The astronaut accusation. One of the leading causes of people who claim to believe in aliens and UFOs not being taken seriously is a perceived lack of credibility. If someone reports seeing a UFO, many people immediately assume that the person either saw an airplane from a weird angle, is lying, or is insane. Which is part of why it is so exciting when someone with a staggering amount of credibility comes out in support of the idea of alien life. Edgar Mitchell is one such person. Not only does he have 2 Bachelor of Science degrees, as well as a doctorate in aeronautics from MIT, but he is also a former NASA astronaut who was the 6th man in history to walk on the moon as part of the 1971 Apollo 14 mission. In fact, he is tied with fellow astronaut Alan Shepard for the record of the longest moonwalk in history, having tread its surface for over 9 hours straight during his mission. Mitchell has not said he knows this for sure, but he said in an interview in 2008, when asked about his opinion on alien life, that yes, there's not much question at all that there is life throughout the universe. I'm totally sure we're not alone. He went on to claim that he had intelligence that proved, quote, that we have been visited on this planet and the UFO phenomenon is real, though it's been covered up by governments for the last 60 years or so. In other interviews, Mitchell has confirmed the 1947 Roswell incident and has described aliens as harmless little people. When asked about the former astronaut's comments, NASA curtly replied, quote, NASA does not track UFOs. Dr. Mitchell is a great American, but we do not share his opinion on this issue. Number 3. The MJ-12 documents. When John F. Kennedy was made President of the United States in 1960, he quickly developed a reputation of not being a fan of the intelligence community. He believed that certain information should be shared with the people they were governing, and perhaps even more surprisingly, felt that some information should be shared with their Soviet counterparts, in the interest of developing a relationship and de-escalating the Cold War in the aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis. He apparently drafted and sent a memorandum in 1963, 2 weeks before his death, that requested that NASA initiate broader cooperation with the USSR in their outer space and lunar landing programs. Part of this document says that NASA would have to share classified UFO secrets with the Soviets. It has been claimed that the idea of sharing this information with an enemy state was the last straw for the intelligence community, all of whom apparently formed together to pool information and plans in a group called the Majestic 12, supposedly formed by President Truman in 1947 to deal with UFO activity. In documents that had apparently been saved from a fire known as the MJ-12 documents, it is stated that Kennedy has been making inquiries about the Majestic 12's activities that cannot be allowed. The document goes on to talk about how the issue should be handled, saying that when conditions become non-conducive for growth in our environment and Washington cannot be influenced any further, the weather is lacking any precipitation and should be wet. While for the layman this is more confusing than anything, it may be clear when you consider that wet work is a euphemism for It should of course be noted that official government agencies claim that these documents are forgeries, but it's not like an intelligence agency partially responsible for the death of a president is going to verify documents that supposedly implicate them. Was President Kennedy killed for trying to force NASA to share information on UFOs with the Soviet Union? If these documents are authentic, it would certainly seem to be the case. Number 2. Gordon Cooper's alien adventures. Gordon Cooper is an important figure in the history of space travel, having served as an aerospace engineer, a test pilot, a pilot for the United States Air Force, and was the youngest of the 7 original Project Mercury astronauts. He was the first American to spend a day in space, the first to sleep in space, and was the last American to go on a solo orbital mission. And he set the space endurance record when he traveled 3,312,993 miles in 190 hours and 56 minutes, thus proving that astronauts could survive in space for the length of time that would be required to travel to the moon and back. He was an extremely important historical figure, but unlike many other NASA astronauts, he was not shy about talking about the various experiences he had over the years with unidentified flying objects and the government's efforts to cover these experiences up. Gordon Cooper claimed that he had seen his first UFO while flying over West Germany in 1951, but that his first experience with government cover-ups came in 1957 while he was stationed at the Edwards Air Force Base in California. He had put a crew in charge of setting up an Ascania cinetheodolite, which is a photographic instrument used for collecting trajectory data of aircraft, missiles, rockets, and other similar equipment. The equipment was set up on a dry lake bed and set to take pictures at 30 frames per second as aircraft landed. The men later reported to Cooper that they had seen something odd and had captured images of a strange-looking saucer-like aircraft that hadn't made a sound while landing or taking off. The men were used to seeing experimental aircraft, but were unnerved at the sight of this saucer, which had hovered over them, landed about 50 yards away using 3 extended landing gears, but had taken off when they had approached for a closer look. Cooper called a special Pentagon number which was meant for reporting such phenomena, and was told to have the film developed, to make no prints of it, and to send it to them in a locked courier pouch. However, as Cooper would later admit, they hadn't told him not to look at the negatives before sending them out. He looked at them and saw incredibly high-quality images of the flying saucer. He had expected there to be a follow-up investigation, but he never heard anything further. He tried to track down what happened to the images, but never found out, assuming that they ended up in the Air Force's Project Blue Book, which was the Air Force's official UFO investigation. He had to deal with more government concealment, this time from NASA, when he did his solo orbital mission in 1963. While being broadcast live on NBC, Cooper told Mission Control that he could see a glowing green object which was rapidly approaching his craft. The object was not an illusion, and even showed up on radar, but when he returned to Earth, he was forbidden to talk about the experience any further with the press. The reporters brought in for the subsequent press conference for the mission were also told they could not ask Cooper about the green orb either. Years later, Cooper would talk about his encounter more openly and discuss the fact that NASA and other government agencies were covering up several stories of UFO encounters. He even spoke to the United Nations on the subject, saying, "Authority is afraid that people may think of God knows what kind of horrible invaders. So the password still is, we have to avoid panic by all means." Did Gordon Cooper really see multiple UFOs during his life? And if so, did NASA and the Air Force prevent the public from learning about these visitors from another planet in an effort to avoid panic? Will there ever be a point in history where they trust the people of the world to be able to handle such news? Much like the identity of the flying saucer's pilots, it is unknown. Number 1. The Pentagon accusation. When the subject of aliens or UFOs comes up with government officials, they are often dismissed with a joke about how the only people who believe in such things are crazy conspiracy theorists. But every once in a while, a government employee will come forward and make claims that such theories are not as crazy as the government would have you believe. Luis Elizondo is one such man. Luis was the head of the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program from 2010 until 2017, where he apparently had access to the Pentagon's data on UFOs and had to interview military eyewitnesses of UFO phenomena on a near daily basis. He claims that he spent much of his time at the Pentagon trying to get his program to be taken seriously, but that he was suppressed by other branches of the government, such as NASA, for fear that news of alien visitors would incite mass panic. Other government personnel who tried to keep him quiet apparently did so out of religious reasons, with one claiming that he should stop pursuing UFOs and instead read his Bible, as such craft were probably demons. Elizondo has described seeing footage of crafts that have been able to reach speeds of up to 11,000 miles per hour, while still being able to make seemingly impossible instant 90-degree turns. Other craft have apparently been capable of flight with no visible means of propulsion, meaning that whoever is piloting these craft is in possession of technology generations more advanced than any currently found on Earth. Luis left his position in 2017 in frustration at the refusal of the various branches of government to brief officials or the public on the multitude of UFO sightings they have collected over the years, and the government has tried to discredit him by saying that he had no assigned responsibilities for the AATIP, but this was challenged when former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid released a statement that Elizondo was indeed in a leadership role in the ATIP program. The fact that the government is working so hard to discredit someone who is trying to inform the public about a matter of public importance is disturbing, but unfortunately, not surprising.